Chapter 553. Murong Xiong was shocked and angry. Although he had never seen Mo Xiaoyao before, he knew that Prince Ding had a head of white hair. Moreover, there were only a handful of people in the world who could block his full-strength attack. Other than Prince Ding, Mo Xiaoyao could not possibly be this white-haired man. Genom of Gojoseon looked at the white-clothed man standing in front of him with a complicated expression. However, he had to admit that Mo Xiaoyao's sudden appearance made him secretly relieved. He turned to look at Su Qingchen and said, "Young Master Qingchen, you have a good plan." To be able to arrive so coincidentally, Mo Xiaoyao definitely did not just arrive in an city. However, he did not appear in front of everyone. Clearly, he was a hidden card left behind by Su Qingchen. No wonder Su Qingchen dared to provoke the #1 expert in the world despite his lack of strength. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and did not reply. Genom of Gojoseon saw this and turned to Mo Xiaoyao. "Prince Ding is quite timely. Wouldn't it have been better if he had arrived a little later and caused both sides to suffer?" Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently, "Just now, there were over 100 experts coming this way. It took some time and we were almost late. I'm very sorry." Only then did everyone notice that Mo Xiaoyao's white clothes were stained with blood. The blood had not turned black yet. It was obvious that it had been stained not long ago. Ren Qining, who was still fighting with 4 Qilin guards, heard Mo Xiaoyao's words and her expression changed. Her arm was almost cut off. "It's good that you're here." Ling Taihan stood up and said. Su Qingchen frowned. Many people came. He knew that Ren Qining must have other plans. That was why he asked Mo Xiaoyao to cut off the road to the Murong family. A few hundred guards were still manageable. However, for Mo Xiaoyao to call them experts, they must not be simple. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "Don't worry. Li Li and Mo Jingli are handling it. I came over first to take a look. Young Master Ren, why don't you stop?" Ren Qining frowned and flew out of the battle circle. Just now, he knew that although these people looked ordinary, they were very difficult to deal with. If he had Murong Xiong's ability to kill in one hit, he wouldn't have to worry. But if he didn't, he could only be entangled by them and slowly exhaust his internal energy until he was defeated. As soon as he retreated, the 4 Qilin did not chase after him. Instead, they all retreated to Su Qingchen's side and protected her. Ren Qining looked around and said with a bitter smile, "This one has eyes but cannot see. I have met many times and did not recognize Prince Ding and Wang Fei. This defeat is not undeserved." These words confirmed that Mo Xiaoyao had indeed arrived in an city a long time ago. Mo Xiaoyao smiled without any sincerity and nodded slightly. "I originally just wanted to walk around and join in the fun. I didn't expect young Master Ren to make I feel so surprised and could only stay for a few more days. Isn't today's matter a coincidence? So, if you didn't act smart and send people to follow me, I would have left long ago. So today's defeat is also because you asked for it." Ren Qining understood the meaning behind Mo Xiaoyao's words and his face became even uglier. "You are Prince Ding?" Murong Xiong stared at Mo Xiaoyao and asked in a low voice. Mo Xiaoyao raised his head and said proudly, "That is I." Murong Xiong could be considered a figure in Jianghu, but the Prince Ding mansion had never lacked geniuses. Every generation of Prince Ding was a stunning figure. How could Mo Xiaoyao pay attention to someone like Murong Xiong who didn't know anything other than martial arts? Murong Xiong sneered, "What a good Prince Ding. This old man wants to see what kind of ability you have." The sword in Mo Xiaoyao's hand trembled and he smiled faintly, "Why don't you try? Pavilion Master Ling, can you still move?" While they were talking, Ling Taihan and Genom of Gojoseon took the opportunity to adjust their breathing. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, they immediately moved their feet. The 3 of them formed a triangle around Murong Xiong. At this time, no one wanted to overestimate themselves and fight Murong Xiong one-on-one. Moreover, apart from Ling Taihan, the other 2 weren't people of Jianghu. Naturally, they couldn't be expected to follow the rules of Jianghu. Killing the opponent was the most important thing. Ren Qining suddenly intervened and stood in front of Genom of Gojoseon. He smiled and said, "The three of you, it's fine if it's 2 against 1, but 3 against 1 is unsightly. Why don't I experience a few moves from Genom of Gojoseon?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled, "Young Master Ren, please do as you wish." After saying this, he didn't pay attention to the others and waved his sword. A biting cold light flashed towards Murong Xiong. Ling Taihan didn't hold back either. He waved his sword and sword chi surged. The two of them worked together much better than Genom of Gojoseon. Even Murong Xiong wasn't as relaxed as he was. On the other side, Ren Qining naturally began to fight with Genom of Gojoseon. On the road to the Murong clan, there was also a bloody and chaotic battle. One side of the battle wore the clothes of ordinary people and used all kinds of weapons. However, each of them had extraordinary skills. On the other side, Mo Jingli's bodyguards were faintly unable to stop them. Mo Jingli swung his sword and killed an enemy. He felt a strong wind coming from behind his head and hurriedly wanted to dodge, but it was too late. Just as he saw a long sword stabbing towards his chest, a white shadow flitted past. The sword that was hurriedly stabbing towards his chest paused. Mo Jingli quickly dodged, and when he turned back, he saw that the person had fallen to the ground. Not far away, the plain-clothed woman was graceful, but her methods were swift and fierce. Her moves were simple and clear. In the blink of an eye, there were 3 or 4 corpses lying in front of her. Mo Jingli was stunned. He looked at Yili with a complicated expression. Yili slashed a person's neck with her sword. When she turned around, she saw Mo Jingli standing behind her and looking at her in a daze. She couldn't help but frown and say, "Your Highness Princely, how can you be distracted even on the battlefield?" Only then did Mo Jingli come back to his senses. He looked at Yili strangely and said, "How can you be like this?" Yili was speechless and rolled her eyes at the sky. She couldn't understand what Mo Jingli wanted to say. She turned around and the dagger in her hand flashed coldly. She cut off an enemy's wrist, but Mo Jingli pulled her back again. Yili frowned. She looked angrily at Mo Jingli and said angrily, "What do you want to do?" On the side, the Shadow Guard and Qi Lin of the Prince Ding mansion saw their Wang Fei being held back by Prince Li and approached Yili with interest. They separated the enemies around the two. Yili saw the situation and took a deep breath. She pushed aside Mo Jingli's hand and said in a deep voice, "Prince Li, if you have something to say, can't you wait until after this is over?" Mo Jingli looked at her and was silent inside. "When this is over, can I find you to talk to?" Mo Jingli had never thought that he, as a prince, needed to charge into battle like a normal soldier. So when his subordinates were still fighting, he didn't feel any shame in standing here and gossiping. Mo Jingli stared at Yili and said, "You never told me that you were so skilled." Yili heard the hidden condemnation and rolled her eyes. She really had enough of Mo Jingli's old words. It was as though every time they met, he would bring up the same topic. It was as though she had wronged him. "What does my skills have to do with you, Prince?" During the time the two were facing off, the people of the Prince Ding mansion and Prince Li worked together to finish off their opponents. Yili was too lazy to pay attention to Mo Jingli, who was going crazy. She turned and headed back to the Murong family. Chapter 554. Before she could turn around, she saw a group of people approaching. Yili couldn't help but frown. Ren Qining couldn't have hidden so many people near An City without anyone noticing. Mo Jingli glanced at them and said, "It's Imperial Brother." It was indeed Mo Jingqi and his group of highly skilled guards. Yili frowned. They didn't bring many people with them this time, so they chose to work with Mo Jingli to intercept Ren Qining's people. Of course, this was because Mo Jingli had taken advantage of many of the Murong family's businesses in Dechu State. On the other hand, although Mo Jingli wasn't a reliable person, Yili still felt that this person had a bottom line compared to the sometimes calm and sometimes crazy Mo Jingqi. She didn't expect that Mo Jingqi, who cherished his life so much, didn't leave when An City was obviously in chaos. Instead, He brought people to the Murong family. What is he doing here now? Mo Jingli laughed coldly. What else can I do? Naturally, he's here to loot a burning house. Yi Li smiled coldly. Loot a burning house. Who can he rob? As they spoke, Mo Jingqi had already walked in with his people. When he saw Mo Jingli, his originally smiling face became gloomy and distorted when he saw Yi Li. Princess Ding? Why are you here? Yi Li smiled faintly. And city is Shiling's territory. The people of Shiling have never said that they don't want me here. Why can't I be here? Mo Jingqi's eyes were probing. Since Princess Ding is here, then Prince Ding is naturally here too. Yi Li smiled and said, Does Emperor Chu want to have tea with our prince? Mo Jingqi looked at Yi Li and the guards beside her. His eyes flashed and he turned to Mo Jingli and asked, Why is Imperial Brother here? Mo Jingli solemnly said, I came to join in the fun and happened to run into Princess Ding. Isn't Imperial Brother here as well? Mo Jingqi said, Is that so? From his tone, it was clear that he did not believe Mo Jingli's explanation. Mo Jingli knew that Mo Jingqi was suspecting that he might be in cahoots with Mo Xiaoyao. He didn't explain, nodding and saying seriously, Yes. I have to go to the Murong family first. If Prince Li and Emperor Chu still have things to say, I will take my leave first. Yi Li smiled faintly. Mo Jingli said, I also have to go to the Murong family. Let's go to Ba together. Imperial Brother. Mo Jingqi said in a low voice, Of course I have to go and take a look. As he said this, his gaze kept lingering on Yi Li. Yi Li didn't care and walked casually beside Mo Jingli. She didn't care about Mo Jingqi's expression and talked with Mo Jingli as they walked towards the Murong family. Mo Jingqi walked alone on the other side. His gaze sweeping over the two of them was dark and cold, causing them to tremble in fear. Yi Li glanced indifferently at Mo Jingqi, who was staring at her from time to time. She obviously knew what Mo Jingqi was thinking. He was thinking about whether or not he could use her to threaten Mo Xiaoyao. Unfortunately, she wouldn't give him the chance. She glanced at Mo Jingli, who was only a step away from her. If Mo Jingqi wanted to make a move, Mo Jingli and his bodyguards would become her best shields. Furthermore, with Mo Jingqi's personality, he wouldn't dare to make a move before he knew which side Mo Jingli was on. When they arrived at the Murong family, the large-scale battle had already ended. In the open space in front of the Murong family's gate, only Mo Xiaoyao and a few others were fighting fiercely. Powerful sword qi and palm qi flew in all directions, smashing the surrounding trees and even the eaves. It was a complete mess. Big brother. Yi Li walked to Su Qingchen's side and said softly. Su Qingchen glanced at Mo Jingli and Mo Jingqi who were following behind Yi Li, then looked at the blood that had accidentally splattered on her body. He couldn't help but sigh. After carefully sizing up Yi Li, he asked softly, Is Li injured? Yi Li shook her head and said, Big brother, don't worry. Li isn't injured. How long have they been fighting? Su Qingchen muttered to himself for a moment, then frowned and said, It's been 2 hours. Yi Li said, Xiaoyao has also met Murong Xiong before. Since he said that he and Pavilion Master Ling can deal with Murong Xiong together, there shouldn't be any problems. However, we have to prevent Genom of Gojoseon from taking advantage of the situation after the battle. Su Qingchen nodded and smiled, I also have the same thoughts. So, let Genom of Gojoseon and Ren Qining fight for a while longer. Genom of Gojoseon had already been injured when he fought with Murong Xiong before, and his injuries were even more serious than Ling Taihan's. If he fought with Ren Qining again, his vitality would be greatly damaged, and he wouldn't have the energy to do anything else. Therefore, Su Qingchen watched the battle for a long time and didn't have the slightest intention of asking Qi Lin to help Genom of Gojoseon. Mo Xiaoyao still couldn't see it, but the battle between Ren Qining and Genom of Gojoseon was about to end. As Su Qingchen and Yi Li spoke, the two of them simultaneously sent out a palm strike with all their strength. Then, they both retreated 7 or 8 steps before stabilizing their bodies. Ren Qining's face was pale. He furrowed his brows and finally spat out a mouthful of blood. Even though Genom of Gojosian didn't spit out blood, there was a trickle of blood at the corner of his lips, and his body swayed. Lei Tingfeng hurriedly went forward to support him. Ren Qining and Genom of Gojosian were almost 20 years apart in age. Even though Genom of Gojosian was injured first, it was enough for Ren Qining to be proud that the two of them were able to fight to a draw. Fu Wang, how are you? Lei Tingfeng supported Genom of Gojosian and asked with concern. Genom of Gojosian waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. He raised his head to look at Ren Qining and said, Ren Gongzi is very skilled. Ren Qining's injuries weren't light either. He forced a smile and said, Prince overpraises me. He glanced to the side and saw Yili standing next to Su Qingchen. He grimaced helplessly and said, this one was blind and didn't recognize Prince Ding and Wang Fei. This time, I've really been busy. That was why it was said that it wasn't good to be too shallow. It wasn't good to be too mysterious. If one didn't want to be understood by others, if one hid too deeply, they would lose the opportunity to interact with others. If it was Lei Tingfeng, Mo Jingli, or Tan Jiji, if they encountered Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li on the road, even if they didn't recognize them on the spot, they would still be able to recognize them if they thought about it carefully. After all, the art of disguise wasn't so good that it could change a person's appearance completely. But it was a pity that Ren Qining had never seen Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li before. Even if he had seen pictures of them, the pictures in this era were very abstract and freehand. If they weren't wearing the same clothes, he probably wouldn't have recognized them even if he saw them face to face. If Ren Qining had known that the people he encountered were Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li, he definitely wouldn't have underestimated them and acted so carelessly. Yi Li didn't feel anything towards Ren Qining's frustration. She smiled and said, Gongzi is too polite. This consort and prince didn't think that we would meet someone like Gongzi. It's an honor to meet you. Lin Gongzi. Ren Qining's eyes narrowed and he stared closely at Yi Li. He smiled faintly and turned his gaze towards Mo Xiaoyao and the others who were still fighting. At this time, the fight had already reached its most critical point. The spectators couldn't help but hold their breaths. Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan looked at each other and stood up at the same time. One in front and one behind, they stabbed towards Murong Xiong. Murong Xiong was pincered by the two of them and was also under great pressure. Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan working together was several times more difficult to deal with than Genom of Gojosian. Both of them used swords. Ling Taihan's swordsmanship was steady and wide, with the style of a great master. Mo Xiaoyao's swordsmanship was swift and fierce. His sword moved from the side, making people unable to avoid him. Even Murong Xiong couldn't help but admit that these two people were heavenly geniuses. If they were in the same era as him, their achievements would be even greater than his. More importantly, when the two of them were fighting, when one of them attacked with all his strength, the other would take the opportunity to rest and vice versa. Murong Xiong knew that they wanted to prolong the fight to exhaust his martial arts, but he couldn't break through the situation. When the two swords stabbed towards him, Murong Xiong already felt a trace of fatigue. However, he wasn't willing to let these two arrogant juniors go. He leaned to one side and separated his palms to attack the two of them. Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan clenched their teeth. Instead of retreating, they advanced and stabbed their swords towards Murong Xiong without any hesitation. Of course, Murong Xiong's two palms also landed on their bodies. The two of them were sent flying at the same time. Even their swords fell from their hands. Xiaoyao! Big brother! Yi Li and Ling Luyue exclaimed at the same time. They flew forward to support Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan who had fallen. They couldn't see clearly because of the fight from afar. Now, they saw that Mo Xiaoyao was covered in sweat. Even his silver hair was wet. Ling Taihan's face was also pale. The back of his blue robe was completely dyed dark blue. The hand that was holding the sword was also trembling slightly. Yi Li repeatedly called out, Xiaoyao, Xiaoyao, how are you? Mo Xiaoyao took a breath and then smiled at Yi Li comfortingly, I'm fine. My sword stabbed him first. If it wasn't for the fact that Murong Xiong had lost a lot of internal energy, the two of them would have been injured even more. At least Mo Xiaoyao still had the energy to provoke Ling Taihan. Last time you won. This time I won. Ling Taihan helplessly smiled. This time you won. Everyone looked at Murong Xiong, who had also fallen to the ground. His injuries were much worse than Mo Xiaoyao's and Ling Taihan's. Mo Xiaoyao's sword had directly pierced through his chest. Ling Taihan's sword had also slashed across his waist. His entire upper body was dyed dark red with blood. Yi Li saw clearly that Mo Xiaoyao's sword had directly pierced through his heart. It was already very shocking that Murong Xiong was still breathing, but it was clear that he wouldn't be able to survive. Thinking about how if Mo Xiaoyao's sword hadn't pierced through Murong Xiong's heart, even if Murong Xiong was killed by Ling Taihan, his injuries would have been even worse. After that, even if Murong Xiong didn't have the strength to kill the two of them, killing one of them would be more than enough. Thinking of this, Yi Li couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. However, what Yi Li didn't know was that Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan had been forced to take such a risk. The two of them had indeed planned to first exhaust Murong Xiong's internal energy and then kill him. However, Murong Xiong's internal energy was more profound than theirs by nearly 50 years. Murong Xiong had consumed a lot of his internal energy, but the two of them had consumed a lot more. If they couldn't kill him in one blow, who knew who would be the one to wear out who in the end? Murong Xiong couldn't stop coughing. Blood had already spilled out of his mouth. He stared unwillingly at Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan and sternly said, "Good. Good Prince Ding. Good Yanwang Chamber's Lord. I didn't think this old man would actually." The unparalleled expert of the past had actually died at the hands of two juniors. Before Murong Xiong could finish what he wanted to say, he died with his eyes wide open. He died with his eyes wide open. Everyone present was silent. Murong Xiong could be said to be one of the strongest martial artists in the world today. The decline of a generation of experts always made people feel a bit sad. Ren Qining, who was standing on the side, couldn't help but change his expression. He suddenly jumped towards Murong Xiong, who was hiding in the corner. Under everyone's gaze, he didn't hesitate to cut Murong Xiong's throat with his sword. Murong Xiong hadn't recovered from his uncle's death before he also lost his life. After killing Murong Xiong, Ren Qining's expression became better. He smiled at Mo Xiaoyao and Genom of Gojoseon and said, "Prince Ding, Genom of Gojoseon, how do the two of you plan to obtain Murong Xiong's property?" Genom of Gojoseon frowned and said, "What does young master mean?" Su Qingchen sighed somewhat helplessly. "Presumably, the real gold and silver accumulated by Murong Xiong for dozens of generations is already in young Master Ren's hands, right?" Murong Xiong couldn't touch the shops, trade routes, and farmland of Murong Xiong. What was left was the countless gold and silver accumulated by dozens of generations. Ren Qining smiled and said, "Young Master Qingchen is really wise. Speaking of which, this one is lucky. If it wasn't for this, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to leave in city alive today." After killing Murong Xiong, only he knew the whereabouts of these treasures. This was his protective talisman. Chapter 555. Prince Ding, Genom of Gojoseon, how do the two of you plan to obtain the Murong family's property? Faced with this sudden change, everyone couldn't help but look at each other. Genom of Gojoseon pushed away Lei Tingfeng's hand and coldly stared at Ren Qining. "What does young Master Ren want to do?" For the sake of the Murong family, the price and energy he spent far exceeded that of Mo Xiaoyao and Su Qingchen. Therefore, he couldn't tolerate the cooked duck flying away like this. Mo Xiaoyao was still lying on the ground, unable to get up. He leaned his head against Yi Li's chest and lazily looked at Ren Qining. "I already said that I only came to join in the fun, so I really did come to join in the fun. The matter of the Murong family's property, I don't have the final say." "Ah! Murong Xiong, that old fellow is very powerful. Li, your husband's injury is very serious. Seeing his pale face but smiling at her as usual, Yili's heart ached. Is it very painful? Let's immediately go back and call a doctor. Although Mo Xiaoyao said that he was seriously injured, other than Ling Taihan, no one really thought that he was seriously injured. Looking at the person half lying on the ground, the vigilance in their eyes became even stronger. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, Ren Qining raised her eyebrows and looked at Su Qingchen. She smiled and said, "Then what does young Master Qingchen say?" Su Qingchen looked down and indifferently smiled. The Morong family doesn't belong to the Prince Ding mansion. At most, it can be considered a windfall. Don't look at the blood flowing like a river this time. In fact, other than Mo Xiaoyao receiving an unknown injury, the Prince Ding mansion didn't suffer any losses. The people who took action were either Genom of Gojoseon, Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, or Mo Jingli's men. The Prince Ding mansion did not bring many people, so the number of sacrifices was naturally limited. Moreover, even if they didn't have anything else, at least all of the Morong family's properties in the northwest and half of the Dechu state's properties had been taken over by the Prince Ding mansion. Even if they couldn't get the remaining property, the Prince Ding mansion wouldn't suffer a loss. Hearing this, Ren Qining's face darkened. He smiled faintly and said, "I remember that I have never offended young Master Qing Chen or the Prince Ding mansion. Can't we part on good terms?" His biggest bargaining chip now was the Morong family's wealth, but if the Prince Ding mansion wasn't interested in this, then his chance to escape. Moreover, even if young Master Qing Chen isn't interested, I wonder if Genom of Gojoseon, Pavilion Master Ling, Emperor Chu, and Prince Li are also not interested. Ren Qining's gaze turned to the others. He smiled and said, "Speaking of which, it's a coincidence that you are a little late. The Morong family is indeed a century-old family with wealth comparable to that of a country. I'm afraid that the combined wealth of the West Hill and the Dechu states and national treasuries can't compare." As expected, the others' expressions changed slightly. Ling Taihan was still fine. He held Ling Luyue and sickly scholar's hands and stood up. He glanced at Su Qingchen and said, "Whatever young Master Qingchen means, I mean it. Genom of Gojoseon, what do you say?" Su Qingchen asked. Genom of Gojoseon hesitated for a moment and said, "Speaking of which, young Master Ren has nothing to do with the West Hill." Genom of Gojoseon's meaning was self-evident. Mo Jingqi's gaze slowly swept past Mo Xiaoyao and Yili. He suddenly laughed and said, "Genom of Gojoseon is right. Moreover, young Master Ren didn't do anything. If something happened in the West Hill, who would dare to come to the West Hill? Young Master Ren and I hit it off at first sight. Why don't we go back and have a drink together?" Actually, the most talkative person present was Mo Jingqi. The others had more or less experienced a fierce battle. Only Mo Jingqi and the hundreds of experts around him hadn't fought. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao who was leaning against Yili, Mo Jingqi's eyes were filled with resentment, fear, and unwillingness. He wasn't sure how serious Mo Xiaoyao's injuries were. He also didn't dare to bet that his subordinates wouldn't be able to kill him. Therefore, he didn't dare to act rashly. If it was someone else, Mo Jingqi might have given it a try. However, the person who was injured was Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Jingqi didn't dare to do so. Back then, Mo Xiaoyao's injuries were so severe that many imperial physicians had said that he wouldn't live past a month. However, he managed to survive. Many people said that he wouldn't recover in his lifetime. However, in less than 10 years, he was standing in front of Genom of Gojoseon again. His martial arts were even better than before. Faintly, Mo Jingqi had a strange thought in his mind: Mo Xiaoyao can't be killed. Su Qingchen sighed helplessly. He glanced at Mo Jingqi who was looking at him provocatively. The ruler of a country could provoke a strategist from Glass City and still be so arrogant. How promising. I understand the intentions of Genom of Gojoseon and Emperor Chu. Since that's the case, young Master Ren, hand over the whereabouts of the Morong family's treasures. Before you leave Xiling, the Prince Ding mansion won't make things difficult for you. In other words, once he left Xiling, things might not be the same. He nodded and smiled, "Thank you for your mercy, young Master Qingchen." As long as he left Xiling, no, as long as he left in city, there would be people who would come to his aid. When that time comes, he wouldn't necessarily be afraid of the Prince Ding mansion. However, it seemed like he couldn't keep the treasures that he had obtained with great difficulty. Fortunately, he wasn't completely unprepared. Everyone present was a powerful figure. Naturally, they wouldn't go back on their word on this kind of matter. Ren Qining straightforwardly handed over the address and account book of the Murong family's treasure. The gold and silver accumulated by more than 10 generations of Murong family heads was indeed astonishing. After confirming that it was indeed the Murong family's treasure, Ren Qining didn't care about how they were going to divide it. He cleanly bid them farewell. After all, it wouldn't be his turn to divide it. Before Ren Qining left, he took with him the last surviving descendant of the Murong family, Murong Mingyan. According to the original agreement with Genom of Gojoseon, the Prince Ding mansion would get 30% of the Murong family's property, the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce would get 10%, and the rest would go to Genom of Gojoseon. Mo Jingqi only got a portion that Ren Qining specially gave him. Although he was jealous of Mo Xiaoyao and Genom of Gojoseon, he still remembered that this was under someone else's roof, so he didn't say anything. As for Mo Jingli, he had another agreement with the Prince Ding mansion. Naturally, it had nothing to do with the Murong family's property. When Yi Li and the others returned to Qingyuan Inn, the entire inn was already empty. From the shopkeeper to the cleaning staff, everyone had disappeared. Yi Li and the others already knew that Qingyuan Inn was related to Ren Qining, so they weren't too surprised. For safety's sake, they all moved to the inn that Su Qingchen was temporarily staying at. Genom of Gojoseon left Leitingfeng to deal with the aftermath and rushed back to the Emperor of Xiling City on the same day. Mo Xiaoyao's injuries really weren't light. He was forced by Yi Li to lie on the bed to recuperate and couldn't get out of bed to move. For Mo Xiaoyao, lying on the bed to recuperate was more painful than killing him. However, Yi Li had been frightened by his injuries and ordered him to stay on the bed to rest. Therefore, Master Prince Ding became even more persistent in pestering Wang Fei to accompany him to recuperate. Master Qing Chen's face became uglier by the day as he worked outside. Reporting to Prince Wang Fei. Emperor Chu and Li Wang have come. The guard outside the door reported. Mo Xiaoyao, who was lazily lying on the bed with his head raised as Yi Li fed him fruit, frowned and said impatiently, "What have they come for?" The guard outside stilled. How could he know why those two had come to find the prince? But this didn't affect the displeasure in his prince's tone. He hurriedly asked, "Should this subordinate invite them back?" The room was quiet for a while before Yi Li's voice came, "Invite Emperor Chu and Li Wang in." Chapter 556. The door to the room opened. Mo Jingqi and Mo Jingli entered together. Within the room, the screen separating the inner and outer rooms had already been removed. As soon as the two entered, they saw Mo Xiaoyao half reclining on the bed. His white hair was casually scattered on the bed, and his white robes made him appear particularly cold and distant. Yi Li sat on the edge of the bed, casually putting down the apple she had just peeled. Nodding her head, she smiled and said, "Emperor Chu, Prince of Li, please sit." The two silently sat down. The imperial bodyguards were standing guard outside, and Yi Li was being held back by Mo Xiaoyao. Naturally, they could not expect anyone to serve them tea. Fortunately, the two were not here to drink tea. Mo Xiaoyao glanced at the two, asking, "What business do you have with I at this time?" Such a casual tone was nothing in Mo Jingli's ears. However, in Mo Jingqi's ears, it was completely different. When Mo Xiaoyao was still in the Chu capital, he would never have used such a casual and perfunctory tone to speak to him. Even if the politeness and submission in his tone were fake, he would at least put on an act. However, right now, Mo Xiaoyao's tone was as if the person in front of him was not the monarch of a country, but a random cat or dog. If he was happy, he would say a few words, and if he was unhappy, he would ignore him. Seeing that Mo Jingqi was about to fly into a rage, Mo Jingli inadvertently coughed lightly and asked, "Imperial brother, don't you have something to ask Prince Ding? Although he also found Mo Xiaoyao displeasing to the eye, it had to be said that seeing his imperial brother's face darken with anger, Mo Jingqi felt rather happy. Mo Jingqi took a deep breath, suppressing the anger in his heart. Staring at Mo Xiaoyao, he asked, "Where did Princess Chang'e go?" Mo Xiaoyao looked doubtfully at Mo Jingqi. Only after quite a while did he lightly scoff. Indifferently, he asked, "Princess Chang'e is your daughter. How would I know where she went?" Mo Jingqi sneered, "Chang'e went missing in the Nanzhao Palace. Who else could it be but you?" Mo Xiaoyao's lips curled up, his tone mocking. "That's right. Princess Chang'e went missing from the Nanzhao Palace. How would I know why she went to the Nanzhao Palace? How would I know when she went to the Nanzhao Palace? Mo Jingqi, your daughter is missing and you come to ask me for her. Are you going to ask I for her one day when your dragon throne is gone? You!" Mo Jingqi's complexion alternated between green and white. Finally, unable to restrain himself, he slapped the table and stood up, glaring angrily at Mo Xiaoyao. How could Mo Xiaoyao take Mo Jingqi's anger seriously? Lying back on the soft pillow, he gazed impatiently at Yi Li. "I'm hungry." Yi Li helplessly picked up an apple from the side, cutting it into small pieces and feeding it to him. Mo Xiaoyao ate happily, not forgetting to share with Yi Li. "Li, eat too. The food that Lei Tingfeng sent over is not bad." Seeing the two people before him acting as if there was no one else present, Mo Jingqi was so angry that his hair stood on end, but there was nothing he could do. He could only leave in a huff. Seeing that he was about to leave, Mo Xiaoyao gave him a look and said, "Wait." Mo Jingqi gritted his teeth and said, "What else do you want to say?" Mo Xiaoyao looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. After thinking for a bit, he said, "It's rare for you to specially visit so I'll tell you a piece of good news for free. Speaking of which, the Rengongzi that you met a few days ago, is the current commander of the northern region, the orphan of the previous dynasty, Lin Yuan." This news immediately made Mo Jingqi dizzy, unable to recover for a long time. Mo Jingli frowned and said, "If Ren Qining is Lin Yuan, then who is Tan Jiji?" Mo Xiaoyao shrugged, indicating that he didn't know. Mo Jingqi laughed coldly and said, "You think I'll believe your nonsense?" Although he said this, Mo Jingqi's heart was faintly shaken. This was because he knew that Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't use this kind of thing to tease him. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao's slightly mocking expression, Mo Jingqi hated that he couldn't find a hole to hide in. The Tan Jiji that he trusted was a remnant of the previous dynasty, and the Ren Qining that he had just saved 2 days ago was also a remnant of the previous dynasty. If this spread out, where would he put his face as the emperor? He couldn't be bothered to argue with Mo Xiaoyao anymore. Mo Jingqi's face darkened as he flicked his sleeves and left. Mo Jingli was a step slower than him, walking behind him. He hesitantly turned around to look at Mo Xiaoyao and asked, "Ren Qining really?" Mo Xiaoyao laughed disdainfully and said, "I don't have candy to eat if I lie to you." Mo Jingqi, that trash, didn't hear anything when someone else was tampering with the land of the Dechu state. In these few years, Ren Qining has taken over the entire northern region, and his hands have already reached the Dechu state. What is that trash doing? This is also good, lest one day I can't stand it anymore and destroy him first. You tell Mo Jingqi that when he becomes the emperor of 10,000 countries, I will send him a sword on behalf of Emperor Taizu to help him die for his country." Mo Jingli was speechless. He turned around and walked out. Outside the door, Mo Jingqi clearly heard Mo Xiaoyao's words. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling, but he couldn't turn around and confront Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Jingli's eyes darkened. He stepped forward and said, "Imperial brother, we should return to the capital." Mo Jingqi coldly snorted, flicked his sleeves and left. Mo Xiaoyao recuperated for nearly half a month before leaving in city with Yi Li. As for the capable young master Qing Chen, he had already returned early. Before leaving, Ling Taihan also brought his 2 sworn sisters and sworn brother to say goodbye. After Pavilion Master Ling fought with Mo Xiaoyao and Murong Xiong twice in a row, he seemed to have realized something and decided to go back and practice in seclusion. And city, which was originally bustling with noise and excitement, had already gradually quieted down. When Yili and Emo Xiaoyao left, only Lei Tengfeng came to see them off. He still had to stay in city to clean up the mess left behind by the Murong clan's destruction. In comparison, although the Prince Ding mansion didn't achieve its goal, it was the most profitable. Because they didn't have to pay anything, all they got was net profit. They didn't even have to clean up the mess. The two of them traveled slowly. By the time they returned to the northwest, it was already the end of September, close to October. Just as they returned to Glass City, they hadn't even entered the Grand Prince Ding mansion when a white and tender little bun wearing an ink-colored brocade rushed out guiltily. Emo Xiaobao hugged Yili and cried earth-shatteringly, "Woo woo, woo wah. Mother, your words don't count, woo woo, you clearly said that you would come to see Xiaobao the next day. Woo wah. Mother doesn't want Xiaobao anymore. Xiaobao is a child that no one wants. Woo woo." Yili couldn't help but frown. Who taught this child all these messy things? But looking at the tearful little bun, even Xiaobao, who usually hated being called the most, came out. It could be seen that he was really sad. Ever since Emo Xiaobao was born, she had always kept him by her side. This was the first time she left for such a long time. Seeing her son crying to the point of hiccups, Yili hurriedly lowered her head and kissed his teary little face. She said softly, "I'm sorry, Mother was wrong. How can Mother not want Xiaobao? Xiaobao is Mother's precious darling." Being kissed by Mother in front of so many people, Emo Xiaobao still felt a little embarrassed. His little face immediately turned red like an apple. But he really missed Mother. In the end, Emo Xiaobao, who couldn't bear to leave Mother, buried his little face in Mother's shoulder. His two little hands tightly hugged Yili's neck, unwilling to let go. "Mother, Xiaobao misses Mother." Yili looked at Emo Xiaobao's white and tender face, his big watery eyes. Her heart softened like a ball of cotton. Mother also misses Xiaobao. Then Mother won't not want Xiaobao anymore? Emo Xiaobao looked at Yili with eager eyes. Yili suddenly had no resistance. Mother will never not want Xiaobao. Mother is the best, Xiaobao loves Mother. Smack, Emo Xiaobao cheerfully gave Yili a few longing kisses. The people who came to receive them saw their little Shitzi and Wang Fei talking about their longing after a long separation. At the same time, they saw their prince standing at the side with a dark face. After a while, Emo Xiaobao was still grabbing his mother to talk about his longing and grievances. Emo Xiaoyao couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. He bent down and lifted Emo Xiaobao from Yili's arms. "Mother." Being lifted by the collar by Emo Xiaoyao, Emo Xiaobao kicked his little legs in displeasure as he begged Mother for help. "Xiaoyao." Yili looked disapprovingly at Emo Xiaoyao. It wasn't good to always lift a child by the collar. What if Xiaobao was hurt? Emo Xiaoyao quickly changed the way he carried Emo Xiaobao that Yili could accept. He held Emo Xiaobao in his arms and looked with a smile at his son, whose eyes were darting around as he said, "Son, Fuwang also misses you very much. Do you not miss Fuwang at all when you see me?" Emo Xiaobao bared his teeth at him at a place where Yili couldn't see. He didn't want to hate Fuwang. It was good if Fuwang didn't come back often. Then no one would steal Mother from him. But in front of Yili, Emo Xiaobao could only obediently nod his head and say, "This child also misses Fuwang." Bending down, he kissed Emo Xiaoyao's face. Emo Xiaoyao, whose face was covered in saliva, was stunned. Then looking at the little thing in his arms with a mischievous smile, Emo Xiaoyao resisted the urge to throw the little thing out. He put on a fake smile and said, "You really are Fuwang's good son. Xiaobao is so obedient. Xiaobao must have finished the homework that Fuwang gave you before you left, right?" Emo Xiaobao's face stiffened. His eyes kept darting around, not daring to look at Emo Xiaoyao. Looking at his expression, how could Emo Xiaoyao not understand? He looked at him with an amiable smile. "Xiaobao, it seems like you need to explain to Fuwang how much you missed your Fuwang these past few months. to the point that you forgot to do your homework. Mo Xiaobao was like a punctured balloon, slowly deflating. Fu Wang and whatnot, he hated it the most. Chapter 557. Returning to the Fu, Yili didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she held the pitiful little bun and pleaded with Mo Xiaoyao for him. Although Mo Xiaobao missed his mother very much, it wasn't to the point where he couldn't do anything but think about her day and night. In fact, after Mo Xiaobao left Mo Xiaoyao's oppression and Mr. Qingyun doted on this great-grandson of his, it was completely different from how he was strict with Su Qingchen and the other brothers. As a result, Mo Xiaobao was so pleased with himself that he was like a wild horse that was out of control. So much so that he forgot about the homework that Mo Xiaoyao had assigned to him last night before he left and said that he would check when he came back. This time, Mo Xiaoyao didn't purposely make things difficult for Mo Xiaobao and gave him homework that he could complete. But the bad thing was that Mo Xiaobao was too smart. Smart people tend to be more scheming than others. So he procrastinated, and when he found out that his father was about to return, he didn't even finish a third of his homework. Alright, split it into 10 days and make up for the homework that your father gave you, understand? Yili reached out and rubbed the child's small head as she said softly. In reality, Mo Xiaobao was so young that Yili didn't feel that giving him too much homework was a good thing. But since it was given, it must be completed. She couldn't let the child develop the mentality of slacking and getting lucky. Mo Xiaobao knew that he was in the wrong and carefully raised his eyelids to look at Yili. In a soft voice, he said, "Mother, this child knows his mistake." Yili nodded with a smile. "If you know your mistake and can change, then you're a good child. Then can this child go a few days later to accompany Taigong?" Mo Xiaobao said shyly. Yili couldn't help but smile. "All right, we'll go see Taigong tomorrow and then tell Taigong that we'll go to the academy in a few days. But you can't be like this in the future. If you study with Taigong, you have to understand the principle of perseverance. You can't neglect your studies because of other things, understand?" Mo Xiaobao nodded obediently. Mo Xiaoyao sat at the side and looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. "If you don't know, then you don't need to study with your grandfather in the future. Father will let your uncle teach you, how about that?" Mo Xiaobao's face immediately fell. Compared with his eldest uncle, who was gentle and elegant but always made him a little scared, he preferred his great-grandfather, who was kind and benevolent. Yili looked at the father and son helplessly. She could feel the unpleasing aura from a few hundred meters away. "Xiaoyao, your injuries haven't healed yet. Rest for today. If there's anything, we can talk about it tomorrow." Mo Xiaoyao's expression relaxed as he nodded. Mo Xiaobao's eyes brightened, blinking his big eyes at Yili. "Nyangqin, Xiaobao wants to sleep with Nyangqin." Yili was about to answer, but Mo Xiaoyao didn't hesitate to pick up Mo Xiaobao and put him on his lap. Looking down at him, he said, "Little brat, you're almost 6 years old and you still want to sleep with Lili. Do you want to be laughed at?" Mo Xiaobao was dissatisfied, arguing with reason. "Father, you're already 30 years old, why do you still want to sleep with Nyangqin?" Pfft! Yili finally couldn't hold back her laughter. Seeing the adult and child looking at her at the same time, she quickly waved her hand and said with a smile, "It's nothing. I still have some things to deal with in the study. You guys can slowly discuss it." Saying this, she ran away under the two's stare. "I want to sleep with Nyangqin," Mo Xiaobao said firmly. "Li is my wife. If you want someone to accompany you, go find your wife," Mo Xiaoyao said. "Nyangqin is my mother. Go find your mother." Mo Xiaobao widened his big eyes. Mo Xiaoyao's mouth twitched, his expression fierce. "Only Nyangqin can sleep with Nyangqin. Those who sleep with Nyangqin are all cowardly and useless little brats." Mo Xiaobao was conflicted. "Where's my Nyangqin?" Mo Xiaoyao's expression was calm as he said calmly, "When you grow up, you can go find her yourself." Outside the door, Yili heard the two's nonsensical conversation and turned to leave with a dark expression. When Yili and Mo Xiaoyao returned to Glass City, all kinds of administrative matters came crashing down. Although Su Hongyu was there were still many things that required Mo Xiaoyao to personally deal with. The first thing that came was the large amount of news regarding Ren Qining sent from Dechu State. Yili and Mo Xiaoyao had already started preparing for the military exercise before they left Glass City. In the study, Mo Xiaoyao stared at the thick pile of documents in front of him and raised his eyebrows. The efficiency of the Prince Ding Mansion's intelligence network was very good. In less than a month, all kinds of news regarding Ren Qining had been sent to the Prince Ding Mansion study. Looking at the information, even Mo Xiaoyao couldn't help but marvel at how deeply Ren Qining had hidden himself. Ren Qining looked like a youth in his 20s, but in reality, he was the same age as Tan Jiji. He was already 37 or 38 years old. To a normal person, this age was not considered young, but to a person who wanted to conquer the world, he was still too young. This person, Fong 12, had not taken a step into the Central Plains for more than 20 years after arriving at a tribe in northern Jin. In these 20 years, he had slowly gained a foothold in the northern region. He had slowly subdued the various tribes in northern Jin, essentially agreeing to the entire northern region. Without anyone, including the Prince Ding Mansion, noticing, he had quietly expanded the northern region into a place with more than 100,000 elite soldiers. To put it bluntly, even if Ren Qining could not succeed in reviving his country, his current strength was enough to make him king of the northern region. From this, it seemed that Tan Jiji, who had been jumping around happily between the Dechu State and Nanzhao, was more like a smokescreen that Ren Qining had placed in front of people. It was just unknown if this smokescreen was intentional or not. Leng Haoyu just sent news. Mo Jingqi is preparing to move troops to the northern region, Su Hongyu said calmly. Move troops to the northern region? Mo Xiaoyao frowned and looked sideways at Lu Jingxian and the other generals sitting on the side. He asked, can the Chu army defeat the army of the northern region? Lu Jingxian thought for a moment and said, in terms of national strength and military strength, the Chu army has no reason not to be able to defeat the northern region. But in recent years, the northern region has been in chaos and various tribes have gone on expeditions. Although the northern region only has a few 100,000 troops, they can be said to be elite troops that have survived hundreds of battles. And although the Dechu state fought a war a few years ago, its record is worrying. Feng Zhiao laughed coldly, what is the point of the prince being concerned about whether or not he can win? Even if you are willing to send troops to help him pacify the northern Jin, he wouldn't dare to let the Mahist army enter the pass. He has taken most of his troops to the front line at Hong Pass. Mo Xiaoyao smiled in a rare good-natured manner. I am just worried that Mo Jingqi is too useless. If the northern region army really enters, it will not be a good thing for us. If he was worried about the safety of the Dechu state, he would not have purposely provoked Mo Jingqi in city. He only hoped that the generals under Mo Jingqi would not disappoint him too much. Su Qingchen said thoughtfully, if there are no accidents, in at most 3 months, there will be battles between the north and the south. What are the prince's plans? Mo Xiaoyao smiled. Plans? Shouldn't we be preparing for military exercises? Xiling will fight Nanzhao, and the Dechu state will fight the northern region. Let's just play with ourselves. Everyone was speechless. Playing with ourselves? Prince, you really have a good personality. Chapter 558. After discussing the matter of Ren Qining, the topic of conversation naturally turned to the military exercises that had been prepared for several months. Regardless of whether it was Su Hongyu and the other civil officials, or Lu Jingxian and Zhang Qilan and the other military generals, this was undoubtedly an extremely novel matter. In this era, battles were fought from time to time. As a result, there were many who questioned the true significance of this so-called military exercise. However, regardless of what was said, preparations had been made for several months. Everyone was looking forward to it. Upon hearing Mo Xiaoyao's question, Zhang Qilan immediately replied, Prince, please be at ease. According to the prince and princess's instructions, preparations have already been made. The location will be within a radius of 300 li, with Hangzhou as the center. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and stated, the area is large enough. Very good. Just make the preparations according to the previous instructions. Then Prince, when will the time be? Lu Jingxian asked. Mo Xiaoyao lazily raised his eyelids and glanced at him, asking, will the enemy tell you when to launch a sneak attack? Just make the preparations first. Yes, this subordinate obeys. Princess consort, Princess Changel has arrived. Yili was seated in the small study, looking at files when Zhuojing came in to report. Yili was somewhat surprised. She had just returned and already had a pile of matters to attend to. To be honest, she had somewhat forgotten about the matter of Princess Changel. Setting down her brush, Yili said, invite her in. Not long after, Princess Changel stepped into the study. After not seeing her for 2 months, the originally delicate and charming little princess seemed to have lost some weight. Her entire person seemed to have matured greatly. However, her originally bright eyes were now somewhat dim and sorrowful. Greetings to Princess Ding. Princess Changel curtsied and saluted. Yili stepped forward and pulled her up. After sizing her up, she said, the princess seems to have lost quite a bit of weight. Is it because the servants are not taking good care of you? Princess Changel promptly shook her head and replied, Princess Consort's words are too serious. The servants of the prince's estate treat Wuyo very well. After following Feng Xiao and company back to Glass City, Princess Changel abandoned her original title of princess and used the nickname given to her by the empress. Therefore, other than Feng Xiao, Zhuojing, and a few others who followed her to Nanzhao, everyone else in the Prince Ding mansion called her Miss Wuyo. They didn't even mention the surname Mo. Seeing Princess Changel grow up so much, Yili sighed helplessly in her heart. Pulling Princess Changel to the side, she sat down and said, it is good that you have not suffered any grievances. If there is anything that your subordinates have not handled properly, feel free to tell me. Or, you can tell Steward Mo and Zhuojing. Don't make yourself suffer, understand? Princess Changel's eyes reddened slightly. Gazing at Yili, she gratefully stated, everyone treats me extremely well. How could I possibly suffer any grievances? Today, I came to bid farewell to Princess Consort. I want to move out. Yili stared blankly. Frowning slightly, she asked, why? Princess Changel replied, I know that everyone treats me very well. However, Wuyo is still an outsider. The Prince Ding mansion is not like any other place. Moving out gives me a bit more freedom. Smiling faintly, Yili asked, could it be that your uncle Prince Ding and I will restrict your freedom in this mansion? No, that is not what I meant. Princess Changel was somewhat at a loss. For a moment, it seemed that she did not know how to explain this to Yili. In reality, it was not that Yili did not understand her meaning. Even if she and Mo Xiaoyao trusted Princess Changel, in the end, she was still Mo Jingqi's daughter. In addition, although there were not many people in Li City who knew Princess Changel, there were still a few. If the news that Princess Changel was living in the Prince Ding mansion were to spread, it was possible that in the future, there would be even more twists and turns. However, this 13 or 14-year-old child before her had to think of so many problems. Yili could not help but feel somewhat distressed. Perhaps understanding Yili's thoughts, Princess Changel revealed a bright smile. Pulling on Yili's hand, she said, Princess Ding, I know that you are doing this for my own good. However, I have already grown up and left imperial mother and maternal grandfather. Isn't it necessary for them to feel at ease by becoming an adult? It's not like I don't have anything. Imperial mother gave me enough silver to live in luxury for the rest of my life. When they left, they also left behind 2 trusted aides of the Hua family to take care of me. Moreover, I am in the northwest. Princess Ding will definitely not allow anyone to bully me, right? Yili smiled. Reaching out, she stroked the little girl's hair and said, as expected, you have grown up. However, as a girl, what plans do you have for the future? Tilting her head, Princess Changel thought for a moment. Looking at Yi Li, she resolutely stated, I want to study medicine. I know that the Northwest's restrictions on women are not as severe as the Dechu states. After I have completed my studies, perhaps I can open a medical clinic to treat patients. Smiling, Yi Li raised her eyebrows and asked, then who do you want to study medicine from? How do you want to become a disciple? You must know that nowadays, very few physicians accept young girls as their apprentices. Medicine is not something that you can learn by reading a few books. Resolutely, Princess Chengel replied, I can disguise myself as a woman and become an apprentice at the medical clinic. Otherwise, I will spend money to hire a formidable physician to teach me. Imperial Mother said that so long as one wants to learn, there will always be a way to learn something. Moreover, it's not like I don't know anything. I know how to memorize herbal texts and recognize many medicinal ingredients. At the very least, I am better than someone who knows nothing. It will be easier for Master to accept me. Seeing that the young lady had truly made up her mind, Yi Li beamed at her and whispered, seeing that you are so sincere, I'll tell you a secret. Princess Chengel blinked her eyes, looking at her curiously. Yi Li softly replied, the Prince Ding mansion has 2 divine physicians. Ah! Divine physician Shen, who cured Prince Ding's uncle. But I haven't seen him for so long. Princess Chengel's eyes brightened, but she still asked doubtfully. Smiling, Yi Li replied, Sir Shen and Sir Lin are bored in their residences, so they moved to the city and opened a medical clinic. If you can have them teach you, you naturally won't have to worry about your medical skills. Although Princess Chengel did not know who Dr. Lin was, the name of Shenyang was known throughout the world. Hearing Yi Li's words, Princess Chengel made a decision. Nodding her head, she replied, thank you, Princess Ding. I know what to do. Raising her brows, Yi Li smiled and replied, Sir Shen and Dr. Lin may not necessarily accept you. Princess Chengel resolutely replied, I will definitely do my best to beg Sir Shen to accept me. Yi Li no longer tried to persuade her. Sighing, she patted the back of Princess Chengel's hand and said, since you have already made up your mind, I will say no more. Later, I will have someone choose a suitable residence near the prince's residence. You cannot refuse this. In the end, the prince's residence is more familiar with Glass City. It will be more convenient. Princess Chengel no longer refused. Her clear eyes reddened, but she still smiled and replied, then, many thanks, Princess Ding. The two chatted for a while before Princess Chengel rose and took her leave. After sending Princess Chengel off, Yi Li pondered for a while before calling for Zhuo Jing and asking, has young Master Feng San treated Princess Chengel well these past few days? Zhuo Jing stared blankly for a moment. Although he did not understand the meaning behind Princess Chengel's question, he still answered truthfully, there was nothing good or bad about it. Princess Chengel lived in the guest courtyard and did not often meet with young Master Feng San. Yi Li frowned slightly. Thinking for a while, she asked, then, what about on the way back? Zhuo Jing replied, on the way back, young Master Feng San did not seem too willing to get close to Princess Chengel. This subordinate remembers that once again, we missed the town and rested in the wilderness. Lin Han asked young Master Feng San to deliver some food to Princess Chengel. In the end, young Master Feng San threw the food to me. However, young Master Feng San did not treat Princess Chengel rudely. Yi Li nodded and said, I understand. Later, have Feng San come over when he is finished. This subordinate, Feng Xiao, requests an audience with Princess Chengel. Less than an hour later, Feng Xiao appeared outside Yi Li's study. Enter. Hearing Yi Li's words, Feng Xiao stepped into the study. Smiling, he said, Princess Chengel has summoned this subordinate so soon after returning. This subordinate feels extremely honored. What orders does Princess Chengel have? Yi Li was disinclined to pay attention to his mischievous smile. Setting down the dossier, she picked up the teacup by her side and took a sip before indifferently stating, Princess Chengel wishes to use Princess Chengel. Feng Xiao was startled. Before he could speak, he heard Yi Li continue, I have already agreed. Feng Zhiao frowned. Somewhat disapproving, he asked, why? Princess Changel is still a young girl. How will she live by herself when she moves out? Yili smiled faintly and replied, a young girl? Princess Changel is already 14 years old. Although the Prince Ding mansion and the imperial family of the Dechu state are of the same bloodline, they have long been separated by blood. Neither relative nor friend, how can a girl like her remain in the Prince Ding mansion? Feng Zhiao stared fixedly at Yili. It was obvious that he did not believe her reasoning. Yili did not mind. Raising her eyebrows, she smiled and said, all right. Actually, this consort feels that young Master Feng San seems to have an opinion about Princess Changel. Since this is the case, Princess Changel is no more than an insignificant young girl, while young Master Feng San is the prince's trusted aide. This consort will naturally take care of your feelings first. Feng Zhiao's complexion was somewhat unsightly. When have I ever had an opinion about Princess Changel? Faced with Yi Li's smile that was not a smile, Feng Zhiao could only silently rub his nose. Then, Princess Changel, there is no need for you to have her move out. After all, she is still a child. I've already said that it was she who wanted to move out. A girl living under someone else's roof is unavoidably sensitive. All along the way, you have been acting strangely towards her. Can you blame her for feeling uncomfortable living in the Prince Ding mansion? You also know that she is still a child. Since this is the case, the grudges of adults have nothing to do with her. Not only you, but I'm afraid that everyone in the mansion who knows of her identity also has a knot in their hearts. Although she would not be rude, how could a girl who was as meticulous as her not be able to detect the attitude of others towards her? It was no wonder that Princess Changel had come to say her farewells on the second day of her return. However, this could not be blamed on anyone. After all, her father was Mo Jingqi. Everyone knew that it was wrong to take their anger out on someone else. However, how many people were capable of doing so? I know that this matter is my fault. Princess Changel, please have her stay, Feng Zhiao said. Yili shook her head and replied, Princess Changel has already decided to become an apprentice to a master and study medicine. It will be more convenient for her to live outside. The only reason I have asked you to come is to have you find a suitable residence for her, as well as take care of her outside. There are many people and matters within the Prince Ding mansion. Even if we instruct her, it is not certain that she will not be wronged. Feng Zhiao was silent for a moment. He felt that Yi Li's words were reasonable. Nodding his head, he replied, this subordinate understands. Princess Changel, please be at ease. Chapter 559. At the end of the 10th month, the Dechu state officially declared war on the north. Almost at the same time, Shilin Genom of Gojoseon ordered his son, Genom of Gojoseon heir Leitingfeng to lead 200,000 soldiers to the border between the south and Nanzhao. For a time, all the countries began to mobilize their troops. Even the northern tribes, who were in the middle of the bitter cold, began to move. At this time, the military exercise that the Prince Ding mansion had been preparing for several months began. In the morning, the general Zhang Qilan, who was stationed in the camp 30 li outside of Li City, received an order, lead the troops at full speed to Jiantianya, 50 li northwest of Hangzhou, and seize the natural stronghold Jiantianya. This order came too quickly and could be said to be completely unprepared. Fortunately, the Mahist army had always been well trained. In addition, everyone's hearts had been stretched taut recently, so they did not panic this time. When he received the order, Zhang Qilan was eating dinner with a few of his subordinates and discussing the military situation. Looking at the graceful but elegant handwriting on the letter, Zhang Qilan jumped up and shouted to his subordinates, pass down the order, break camp and depart in an hour. But he felt strange. Why did this order look like Wang Fei's handwriting? The generals all paused. The braver ones quickly asked, General, we are. Zhang Qilan chuckled and said, it's starting. Little ones, work harder. We have to beat that old guy until he cries for his father and mother. Everyone couldn't help but laugh. The atmosphere in the tent instantly relaxed. Zhang Qilan glared and roared, "Hurry up and get ready." Immediately, everyone dispersed out of the tent and went to dispatch their subordinates. After sending his subordinates away, Zhang Qilan looked at the letter in his hand again. He wiped his face and turned to prepare for his expedition. "General Zhang, sorry to disturb you so late at night." Outside the tent, an elegant voice said with a faint smile. Zhang Qilan paused and then realized who had spoken. He quickly went forward. The curtain outside the tent was lifted and the person outside walked in. Zhang Qilan hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "This subordinate greets Princess." Unlike usual, Yi Li was wearing a long gray cloak, but her hair was combed into a man's bun. From the white hem of the cloak, it could be seen that it was a man's clothing. Zhang Qilan had some doubts but still asked, "Wang Fei, this is?" Yi Li smiled and said, "General Zhang is about to go to war. This one is not talented enough to recommend myself as an advisor. I hope General will not reject me. Wang Fei is saying that she wants to march with us." Zhang Qilan asked in surprise. Yi Li nodded. Zhang Qilan said with some difficulty, "This Wang Fei's body is priceless." "What if?" Yi Li played with the folding fan in her hand and said with a smile, "There's no guarantee that nothing will happen in this world. Besides, I've been on the battlefield several times. Even if I can't help General Zhang, I won't drag you down." Zhang Qilan said he didn't dare. He naturally knew the abilities of this Wang Fei. With her help, it was like obtaining a powerful advisor and general out of nowhere. But Yi Li's status made him uneasy. Also, if this was the case, even if he won against Lu Jingxian, it could only be said that they had a slight advantage. Yi Li naturally saw the reason for his hesitation. She couldn't help but smile and say, "Speaking of this matter, it is actually General Zhang who is at a slight disadvantage." "Does General Zhang know who is leading the Western Army?" Hearing this, Zhang Qilan suddenly had a bad feeling. His mind moved as he said, "Is it?" Yi Li nodded and said with a smile, "Yes, the other side is led by Prince Ding. Lu Jingxian is the deputy general." Zhang Qilan's face darkened. Even though he was much older than Prince Ding, when it came to commanding troops, he could only admit that he was inferior. When Imo Xiuyao had conquered the south and Nanzhao, Zhang Qilan had accompanied him. He had probably never thought in his life that he would face off against Imo Xiuyao. Yi Li looked at Zhang Qilan with a smile and said, "General, are you declaring defeat before the battle?" Zhang Qilan gritted his teeth and nodded, "Since that is the case, I will have to trouble Wang Fei." Declaring defeat before the battle was naturally impossible. So right now, he couldn't care about Yi Li's status. The more experts he had, the better. Even if he couldn't win, he had to bite off a piece of the other's flesh. What's more, the thought of exchanging blows with His Highness made his blood boil. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "I don't dare. This one is Chu Junwei. General can just call me by my name." An hour later, the army had finished their preparations. At this time, the sky had already darkened, but the army had to march through the night. Glass City was 300 li away from Jiantian Cliff. The Black Cloud cavalry was fine, but it was impossible for the Mahist army's normal soldiers to arrive in a day. When the army set out, the generals by Zhang Qilan's side discovered that there was a young man with a gray cloak at the general's side. In the darkness of the night, even his appearance couldn't be seen clearly. "General, this is..." Zhang Qilan's face twisted slightly. He said in a low voice, "This is this general's military advisor." "Where is Feng Zhiao?" Feng Zhiao was also on the list of generals for this exercise. However, young Master Feng San, who had always been by Imo Xiuyao's side, was unfortunately assigned to the opposite side of Prince Ding. But from the start, Zhang Qilan had never seen this young master show his face. Yi Li said in a low voice, "Feng San has already left." Zhang Qilan was startled, but he quickly reacted. With over 10,000 soldiers, it was impossible for them to reach Jiantian Cliff without being discovered by Prince Ding. The worst thing was that there was a division of the Western Army that they had to pass through on their way to Jiantian Cliff. Wang Yi would definitely not allow them to reach Jiantianya so smoothly. Feng Zhiao leading the Black Cloud Cavalry to open up a path in front was much better than being stopped and beaten when they reached the place. In the darkness of the night, a group of people rode their horses forward. Behind them was a long line of Mahist army soldiers. Inside the Western Army camp, Mo Xiaoyao was still dressed in white, his hair white like snow. He sat lazily in the large tent, looking at the map in front of him as if he was deep in thought. Lu Jingxian sat next to him and said, "Prince, Zhang Qilan can be considered to be from the Black Cloud Cavalry and has always been fast. I'm afraid that they have already left the camp." Mo Xiaoyao nodded and raised his eyebrows. No matter how fast they are, they only have 10,000 Black Cloud Cavalry. If they want to rely on 10,000 Black Cloud Cavalry to snatch Jiantian Cliff from us, they must be dreaming. Lu Jingxian nodded and said with a frown, "However, although we have 50,000 Black Cloud Cavalry, our normal strength is clearly weaker than the enemy. The Black Cloud Cavalry's attacks are strong, but their defense is a bit weaker. Even if we take Jiantian Cliff first, to rely on 50,000 Black Cloud Cavalry to defend against 100,000 Mahist army's attacks will be a bit difficult." Mo Xiaoyao looked at Lu Jingxian with a smile. "What? Is General Lu afraid of Zhang Qilan?" Lu Jingxian's expression changed. He stuck out his chest and said, "Who would be afraid of him? Prince, don't worry, I swear to defend Jiantian Cliff to the death." Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand and said, "What do you mean swear to the death? Don't forget that Jiantian Cliff is not the final goal. If we lose all of our men at Jiantian Cliff, how are we going to fight the later battles?" Chapter 560. Lu Jingxian was a little surprised and asked, "What does Prince have in mind?" Mo Xiaoyao thought for a while and said, "Zhang Qilan will definitely rush to Jiantianya with all his might. Let's not rush over there. No matter what, we are still faster than him. Let's add some obstacles to their path. Also, add a line of defense 20 li in front of Jiantianya. Even if Jiantianya cannot defend in the end, it will at least deplete half of their forces." "I understand." Lu Jingxian nodded. Mo Xiaoyao nodded with satisfaction and said, "Then Jiantianya will be handed over to you." Hearing this, Zhang Qilan was stunned. "Handed over to me? Then Prince?" Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile that was not a smile, "I can't tell you." The journey of the East Army was not smooth. On the afternoon of the second day, the army met with the first line of defense set up by the enemy. However, Feng Zhiao, who had set out earlier to open up the path, was nowhere to be seen. The enemy did not have many people blocking their path, less than 2,000 to 3,000 people. If it was on flat ground, an army of 100,000 would be able to trample them to death. However, at this time, they were circling around the mountain path. It was as if one man could hold off 10,000 men. Zhang Qilan was so angry that he kept calling Lu Jingxian despicable and shameless. However, no matter how despicable and shameless the enemy was, they still had to fight. Zhang Qilan was not a brute who only knew how to shout and curse. He immediately sent out a group of people to sneak around the enemy's back and attack from the front and back. Even so, they wasted almost 6 to 8 hours in this place. By the time they met with 2 or 3 similar obstacles along the way, Zhang Qilan had already understood that Lu Jingxian was trying to delay them. Yet, this was the kind of scheme that couldn't be broken. Even if they knew that Lu Jingxian was trying to delay them, they had no choice but to follow this path. If they wanted to take a detour, it would take even longer. The final goal of this act was not the Sky Stream Cliff, but a small town that was dozens of miles away from the Sky Stream Cliff. There were 40,000 soldiers in the small city, and Mo Xiaoyao's Western Army's mission was to occupy the small city. Yili and Zhang Qilan's mission was to reinforce and destroy the Western Army. The mountain stream cliff was the most important place because both the Eastern and Western armies had to pass through here to reach the small city. If Mo Xiaoyao had enough troops, he could naturally pass through Jiantianya and take the small city. However, he only had 50,000 Black Cloud cavalry and 40,000 Mahist army. On the other hand, the East Army had 10,000 Black Cloud cavalry and 150,000 Mahist army. The current commander of the small city could not be ignored. He was the Mahist army's commander of Jiangxia City, Yuan Pei, who was very good at defending cities. Thus, if Mo Xiaoyao used all of his troops to attack the city, if he was unable to take down the small city in 3 days, the Western army would be surrounded by the Mahist army. Thus, he could only leave a portion of his troops to Lu Jingxian to delay the reinforcements. However, this also reduced the strength of the attacking troops. Because of the ambushes along the way, the Eastern army used a total of 5 days to reach the lower 3 heavens 20 li away from Jiantianya. Looking at the banners and cold swords on the hillside, Zhang Qilan laughed coldly and turned around to order them to set up camp. His subordinates were all eager to give it a try. The past few days of marching had made them all want to vent their frustrations. They all asked Zhang Qilan for permission to fight. Zhang Qilan waved his hand to suppress everyone's requests. The enemy had the geographical advantage. Attacking in broad daylight was the same as seeking death. What does Mr. Chu think? Zhang Qilan turned his head and asked Yi Li, who was sitting to the side. Everyone also stopped talking and looked at the white-clothed young master sitting to the side. Although many people in the army had seen Yi Li before, they were not familiar with her. Yi Li had changed into men's clothing and changed her appearance slightly. She also rarely spoke, so none of these generals recognized that this somewhat silent young master was actually their Princess Ding. Of course, this was also related to the fact that these generals were proud and did not like Yi Li, who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Naturally, there were not many people who were willing to talk to her. It seems like General Lu wants to stop us outside Jiantianya. At this time, Prince Ding should have already led his troops to attack the city. Yi Li muttered. The people below could not help but scoff. Who didn't know how to say such words? Just by looking at the situation in front of them, they knew what the other party meant. However, Zhang Qilan said thoughtfully, Mr. Chu means Prince Ding is not at Jiantianya right now? If it's only Lu Jingxian, I don't think he has many troops. I might be able to break through Jiantianya in 3 days. Yi Li shook her head and said, if we break through Jiantianya in 3 days, how many casualties does the general intend to suffer? Jiantianya can be considered a natural stronghold. Naturally, it is easy to defend and difficult to attack. If we lose all our troops here, how are we going to reinforce General Yuan? One of the generals below could not help but say, but if we don't break through, how are we going to get there? If we want to take a detour, it will take at least 7 to 8 days. Also, if we walk from the south, we will have to cross mountains and rivers. By the time we get there, we might not even be able to fight. If we go from the north, it will be a large swamp. We won't be able to cross at all. Zhang Qilan looked at Yi Li and asked, what does Mr. Chu mean? Yi Li pointed at the map on the table and said, General Yuan is good at defending cities. Even Prince Ding may not be able to break through the city in a short amount of time. What I mean is, to wipe out all the troops at Jiantianya. Everyone was shocked. Zhang Qilan frowned and said, this will take time, what if we can't reinforce the city in time? Yi Li did not frown and said calmly, we can just take it back after it's broken. A deputy general hesitated and said, but, once the city is broken, the exercise will be over. Yi Li said calmly, it will only be over if one side concedes defeat or both sides suffer great losses. Is it possible that the city is taken by the enemy during the battle and the reinforcements have to go back the way they came? Everyone was silent and seemed to be deep in thought. The tent was silent for a while. Zhang Qilan slapped the table and stood up, saying, good. We'll do as Mr. Chu says. The success or failure of this mission will be handed over to Mr. Chu. Do you have a plan? Yi Li looked at Zhang Qilan with a smile and said slowly, I'm still thinking about it. The night on the battlefield was not peaceful. The moon was dark and the wind was strong. Killing and arson were common on the battlefield. Therefore, when Yili was woken up by the noise outside for the third time that night, she was not surprised. She got up and put on her clothes and cloak before walking out of the tent. Qin Feng immediately appeared at the door. "Master." Yili frowned slightly and said, "Why aren't you resting?" Qin Feng said, "Wei Lin has gone to rest. He'll come to replace me in 2 hours." This time, Yili did not bring Zhuo Jing and Lin Han. Instead, she brought Qin Feng and Wei Lin out. After all, Prince Ding and the king, as well as all the generals in the city, were not there. Zhuo Jing and Lin Han had been left behind to help Su Qingchen. Yili said, "You all go rest. Just send 2 people to keep watch." Qin Feng shook his head and said, "I'll go back to rest in a while. It won't affect tomorrow's work." Yili knew she could not persuade him, so she did not say anything more. She looked curiously at the place where the fire was shining and asked, "Whose people are making trouble?" Qin Feng held back his laughter and said, "It's a few of General Zhang's subordinates. They seem to have agreed to attack the defending army at night. Each of them would hold on for 2 hours and then retreat regardless of the outcome. This is the 3rd wave. The defending army on the mountain probably won't be able to sleep tonight." Yili raised her eyebrows and looked at the place where the sound of fighting could be heard. She raised her eyebrows and smiled, "Interesting. Is this their own idea?" Qin Feng nodded and said, "It seems that they talked to General Zhang after dinner. General Zhang probably agreed. Otherwise, they wouldn't have acted on their own." It seemed that Qin Feng had a good impression of those hot-tempered young people. Although he did not speak for them, he did explain that their actions did not violate military rules. Yili smiled and walked out, saying, "It's always good for young people to have their own ideas. Even if they make a mistake in the drill, it's better than making a mistake on the battlefield." "What does Wang Fei mean?" Qin Feng frowned. Yili said, "It's fine if they harass him once or twice, but if they do it again and again, do they think Lu Jingxian is a vegetarian?" Qin Feng was silent. Yili smiled and said, "Let's go and take a look." Qin Feng hurriedly caught up and asked curiously, "Wang Fei is saying that they will have a problem?" Yili smiled faintly and said, "Lu Jingxian is an old general who has been on the battlefield for a long time. How could he be played by a few young people? If they stop after 1 or 2 times, the other side will be more cautious and probably won't be able to have a peaceful night. But if they do it again and again, how could Lu Jingxian not make a move? As the saying goes, going too far is as bad as not going far enough." Then, Qin Feng frowned and said, "Should we send someone to tell General Zhang?" Yili shook her head and said, "General Zhang and General Lu have known each other for decades. It's impossible that he doesn't understand him. He will definitely be prepared. There's no need for us to meddle. Just watch." As the two were talking, Zhang Qilan's clear voice came from behind them, "Mr. Chu hasn't rested yet this late. Did those young people steal it?" The two returned and saw Zhang Qilan walk over with his head held high. He was wearing armor and battle robes and looked like he was about to go into battle. Yili couldn't help but smile and say, "General Zhang, it's so late. What are you doing?" Zhang Qilan pretended to be angry and said, "Those young people don't know what's good for them. They provoked old Lu. I have to take them back while they're still fine." Hearing this, Yili laughed clearly and said, "Then I'll have to trouble General Zhang." Zhang Qilan cupped his hands and said, "I'll take my leave first." Chapter 561. At dawn, a group of overly excited and hot-blooded youths were indeed dragged back by Zhang Qilan, their faces covered in dirt. Yili and Wei Lin, who came later to replace Qin Feng, waited until the sounds of fighting at the front had stopped. Only after another hour did they see the group of people return to the camp. The young generals who were originally in high spirits drooped their heads, as if they were vegetables that had been hit by frost. As soon as they entered the camp, they saw Yili smiling at them while looking at a carriage. the expressions of the young generals became even more awkward. They felt that the general had found such a young military advisor who they didn't know where he came from. He didn't know anything and only said a few useless words from time to time, but the general valued him so much. These young men were naturally unconvinced. They all thought that they were much better than this pretty boy. Now that they had lost so much face in front of him, their expressions naturally didn't look too good. "Mr. Chu, you haven't rested yet?" Zhang Qilan saw Yi Li and naturally went up to greet her. Yi Li smiled and said, "General, you haven't rested either, right? You've worked hard, General. Are you all right?" Zhang Qilan sighed and said, "Fortunately, you're fine." He turned around and glared at everyone, then roared, "Why aren't you going back to rest? Are you waiting to be punished?" Hearing this, the young generals all scattered like birds and beasts. Seeing how everyone looked at Zhang Qilan as if he was a killing god, Yi Li couldn't help but laugh softly and say, "General clearly has no intention of punishing them. Why are you purposely scaring them?" Zhang Qilan sighed helplessly and said, "The people who came out this time are all young brats. Not only have they never been on a proper battlefield, but they're still hot-blooded and charging forward. If they really went on the battlefield, who knows what would happen?" It turned out that the first two waves of ambushes had caused the enemy to be flustered for a while. These brats got carried away and decided to take turns to fight until dawn. This way, the enemy naturally couldn't sleep for the entire night, but their own people could take turns to rest. His idea was not bad, but he forgot to observe the surrounding positions and the situation of the enemy. Halfway through the third sneak attack, Lu Jingxian sent two groups of soldiers and horses to quietly flank them from both sides. If it wasn't for Zhang Qilan leading the troops, even if they didn't arrive in time, they wouldn't be able to match the 4,000 to 5,000 troops that they brought. Even those 4 to 5 young generals would have died there. The battlefield had always been cruel and merciless. If one didn't come from an aristocratic family, there wouldn't be many captains in an army of millions. Out of a few thousand captains, there would at most be less than 100 who could become deputy generals. And out of these less than 100 deputy generals, there would at most be 2 or 3 generals. It wasn't that these people didn't have the potential to become generals, but that in the process of becoming generals, they had already been engulfed by the shame of the battlefield. "Mr. Chu, please train these kids more in the future," Zhang Qilan said sincerely. He knew Princess Consort's abilities. Not to mention the elusive and invincible Qi Lin, who was personally trained by Princess Consort, Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, and the others by Princess Consort's side were all rising stars if they were placed in the military camp. From this, it could be seen that Princess Consort's methods of teaching people were ingenious. Yi Li smiled and said, "General Zhang is a good general." In this era, it was rare to see a general who was so considerate of his subordinates. Zhang Qilan laughed brightly and said straightforwardly, "These youths are slightly rash, but they are the future of the Mahist army. There will be a day when us old men will be too old to go onto the battlefield. In the future, we will have to rely on them." Yi Li smiled and said, "General is in the prime of his life, it is too early to say the word old. This one will remember what General has said." This was a promise. Zhang Qilan raised his hands in a bow and said, "Thank you, young master. It is still early, young master should return to the tent to rest for a while. Many thanks for General's concern." The next day, when the people of the Eastern Army found that the Western Army guarding the front was still full of energy, a group of youths couldn't help but explode. The tent became a noisy mess. Yi Li smiled as she sat in a corner of the tent and listened to the discussion of these youths. Zhang Qilan was annoyed by their noise and rolled his eyes. "What are you all arguing about? The Jiantian cliff in front is only 20 li, and the guards from last night were tired by your noise. Don't tell me that Lu Jingxian won't transfer the guards from Jiantian cliff over? If you can't get past this obstacle, do you want to fly to Jiantian cliff from the sky?" Everyone was silent for a while and looked at each other. "General, doesn't that mean that we did all this work for free last night? Even if they launched sneak attacks every day, as long as the other side took turns, unless they forcefully broke through the defensive line in front of them, there was nothing else they could do. What's more, they had almost suffered a great loss on the first night of the sneak attack. Jean Chilon scratched the beard on his chin and said, saying that we did all this work for free is not entirely correct. You bunch of brats always get carried away with everything you do. It's fine if you harass them once or twice, but you are addicted to taking turns. Isn't that giving Lu Jingxian a chance to beat you up? The young generals were a little embarrassed, and the older generals sitting next to them also began to chuckle. General, what should we do next? A young general stepped out from the crowd and asked expectantly. Zhang Qilin frowned and turned to look at Yi Li, who was sitting next to him, and asked, "What does Mr. Chu think?" Yi Li tapped the fan in her hand carelessly and said, "The other side has the higher ground, so it will take a lot of time and effort to forcefully attack them. Let's continue our nightly harassment, but don't let General Lu catch us again. Next time, General Zhang might not be able to lead the troops to help everyone out." A few young generals looked at Yi Li with some dissatisfaction and said, "Since Mr. Chu is the military advisor, he must have some tricks up his sleeve. It's just that we won't be able to take them down if we launch sneak attacks every night. If we drag this out for 10 days or half a month, we can just admit defeat without fighting." Yi Li raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, "Then what do you all think? This subordinate requests to be the vanguard and open a path for the army." A young general cupped his hands and said to Zhang Qilin. The others followed suit and asked for Zhang Qilin's permission. It was obvious that they wanted to fight the enemy head-on. Yi Li looked at them plainly and said, "I don't object to fighting head-on, based on the enemy's strength. If we bet on half of their strength, we will definitely be able to take this place. However, I would like to remind all of you that although this is just a drill, if this were a real battle, it would mean that at least half of the 100,000 soldiers here and outside would lose their lives on this small hill in front of Jiantianya." "So what?" someone asked softly. Yi Li smiled and said, "If losing half of our soldiers, including the lives of all of you here, isn't a big deal. In that case, how would the remaining 50,000 soldiers pass through the heavenly stream cliff, which was known as a natural barrier? How many soldiers will be left after they pass through? Or do you all think that, even if we manage to pass through, we will be able to save General Top Scorer from being surrounded? I would like to remind all of you that based on my understanding of Prince Ding, the number of soldiers left behind at Jiantianya is at most a third of the Western Army. The remaining 2/3 are fresh soldiers who have yet to participate in the battle. Everyone here has sacrificed themselves, but may I ask, what will happen to General Top Scorer and the soldiers guarding the city?" Chapter 562. Before Yi Li could finish speaking, the youths who had been acting righteously all turned red in the face. Although they weren't convinced, they couldn't help but admit that strategist Chu was right. Half of the reason why they charged forward so bravely was because they knew this was a drill and not a real battlefield. If this was a real battlefield, would they still charge forward so recklessly? Or even if they continued to charge forward so bravely, what kind of consequences would they cause? Zhang Qilin knocked on the table and said, "Fine, I'll take care of tonight's matters. Without my orders, no one is allowed to act rashly. Those who disobey will be executed." Although this wasn't a real battlefield, his orders were real military orders. Those who disobeyed military orders, regardless of whether it was a real battlefield or not, would be executed without mercy. He turned to look at Yi Li and said with a smile, "Mr. Chu, I'll leave these immature brats to you." Yi Li smiled and said, "It's my honor to have the general believe in me." Zhang Qilin nodded with satisfaction. He stood up and glanced at the group of young men who were still eager to make a move, and said in a deep voice, "Mr. Chu's words represent this general's words. Those who disobey will be beheaded." Zhang Qilin led his older subordinates to deal with Lu Jinxian's men at the front. The group of young and aggressive generals were surrounded by Yi Li and couldn't move. The youths became more and more irritable as they listened to the soldiers entering and leaving the camp every day without a share of them. Finally, on the afternoon of the third day, they couldn't hold it in any longer and came to find Yi Li to argue. Outside Yi Li's temporary tent, Yi Li's smile was as warm as the spring breeze as she looked at the youths in front of her. She smiled and said, "Do you have any objections?" The leader said, "We want to go to war. What right do you have to stop us from going to the battlefield?" Yi Li leisurely played with the fan in her hand and said casually, "Because I'm the strategist. Because General Zhang gave you to me to dispatch. Because I won't allow it, you can't go." This kind of arrogant answer was definitely a provocation to this group of young people. Everyone looked at Yi Li as if they wanted to immediately rush up and give her a good beating. Qin Feng and Wei Lin, who were standing behind Yi Li, calmly glanced at the youths in front of them. A cold glint flashed in their eyes. Yi Li looked at the young men in front of her and continued, "You want to go to the battlefield? What's the point of you going to the battlefield? The generals under General Zhang's command have been fighting without you for the past 2 days, and there has never been a situation where General Zhang has to go personally to reinforce them. It's fine if you're not smart enough, but even if you want to be a fierce general who can defeat the enemy with brute force, you won't be able to fight better than ordinary soldiers, right? Rather than being a hindrance on the battlefield, it's better to stay at the back." The young men were so angry that their faces turned red. One of them with a bad temper stepped forward and pointed at Yi Li with a red face and coaxed, "You're just a weak scholar. What right do you have to talk about us like this?" Yi Li looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile and slowly said, "Because," with a swish, the fan was swung open and like a sharp blade, it slashed towards the young man's throat. That person jumped in fright and quickly bent over to dodge, but he didn't expect his lower body to be kicked in the acupoint. Before he could react, his body swayed and he fell to the ground, raising a cloud of dust. Yi Li waved her fan twice and said casually, "You can't even beat a weak scholar." Everyone was speechless. This time, they were really hit hard. In the past few years, the Mahist army had placed great importance on nurturing young generals. Therefore, these young generals were only in their early 20s, but most of them were already lieutenants or even captains. However, most of them had never been on the battlefield. This was what Yi Li was most worried about. The battlefield had always been a huge meat grinder. It didn't matter if you were an ordinary person or a genius. Once you were involved, the one who achieved the most in the end wasn't the smartest or the most powerful one, but the one who survived. Since ancient times, many geniuses had been drowned out like sand by the waves. Although Yi Li didn't expect them to understand what a real battlefield was this time, and they would only be able to learn when they were on the battlefield, at least they had to suppress the arrogance of these geniuses. As if she didn't see everyone's shocked expressions, Yi Li looked at everyone with a smile and said, "Don't say that I bullied you. These 2 people learned from me. If you beat them, don't even talk about going to fight with General Liu. Even if you want to go to Xiling and destroy Genom of Gojoseon, I won't stop you." Everyone looked at each other and exchanged glances. Yi Li seemed to be afraid that the fire wasn't burning hot enough and continued to pour oil on it. "If you don't have confidence in fighting one-on-one, you can fight together." Qin Feng and Wei Lin could obviously understand Yi Li's meaning. Wei Lin snorted coldly and said, "Don't waste time. Let's fight together." This obviously contemptuous tone finally snapped the last string in everyone's mind. No one knew who shouted, but 5 or 6 young people all pounced towards Qin Feng and Wei Lin at the same time. Of course, Wei Lin, who had just drawn hatred to himself, was the one they focused on. Yi Li retreated to the side and leisurely leaned against Qin Feng and Wei Lin, moving among the youths with ease. Rather than a group fight, it was more like 2 people playing with a group of crazy kittens. These youths were indeed not as good as their peers in the Mahist army, but compared to Qin Feng and Wei Lin, who came from Qilin and were the best among them, they were not enough. The youth who had just been kicked to the ground by Yi Li was still sitting on the ground and didn't get up. He didn't join the fight. It was because he stood outside the fight that he could see the gap between himself and Qin Feng and Wei Lin more clearly. He looked at Yi Li and finally drooped his proud head. Yi Li kicked him with interest and asked, "Why don't you try?" The youth sat on the ground and didn't get up. He shook his head and said, "I'm not an idiot. We can't beat them at all. Do you want to make a fool of yourself? Yili nodded and said with a smile, you are indeed not their match, but that's not important. They are not on the same path as you. It's best if your martial arts are strong, but if you can't, there's no need to compete with them. General Zhang may not be their match. The youth said with dissatisfaction, then why do you want them to fight? Yili raised her eyebrows and said, because compared to you, General Zhang clearly has a smart brain. You don't have anything, but you think you have everything. I think your brains need to be fixed together with your bodies. The youth opened his eyes wide and glared fiercely at Yili, saying, we're not stupid. They were the rising stars of the Mahist army. Who didn't praise them for having a bright future? Yili nodded seriously and said, you really aren't stupid. How can I describe your level of stupidity? Have you ever seen an idiot seeking death? The youth's face turned red with anger. She was saying that they weren't even as stupid as idiots. Yili looked at the person in front of her with interest and couldn't help but smile. A young man in his early 20s whose emotions could rise and fall so easily. In this era where people matured early, it was quite rare. Seeing Yili's teasing smile, the youth couldn't help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. What are you laughing at? Yili coughed lightly and covered her mouth with her fan, saying, nothing, I just want to laugh. While the two were talking, Qin Feng and Wei Lin had already put down a group of children who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. No matter how they went easy on them, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. Therefore, the originally well-dressed young generals all fell to the ground in a sorry state. Yili looked down at everyone with a smile and said, how is it? Do you admit defeat now? We admit defeat. Although the young generals were still a little depressed, the way they looked at Yili and the other two was very different from before. In the military, the strong were king. Although these young people were arrogant, they still respected the strong. The fight just now also made them understand the difference in strength between them and their opponents. But Mr. Chu, we can't always hide in the back and be protected by others, right? Although they knew that they were inferior, they were now on the battlefield. They had to put away their thoughts and think about it later. Right now, they had to solve the battle in front of them. Yili looked at them with a smile and asked, you guys really want to fight? Hearing this, everyone knew that there was hope. 6 or 7 pairs of eyes looked at Yili in unison. The anticipation and desire in their eyes made Yili feel a little pressured. Seeing this group of enthusiastic young people in front of her, Yili smiled faintly and said, it's not impossible. Go back and choose 200 elites from your subordinates and wait for orders. Mr. Chu, what do we need to do? Yili said in a deep voice, it's a secret. Remember, everything has to be done quietly. Do not attract anyone's attention, including General Zhang. The people who are discovered will stay behind to reflect. Young people all liked mysterious and exciting things. Hearing Yili say this, everyone became even more excited. Yili looked at them with a slight frown and said seriously, also, even though this is acting, the danger still exists. This mission can be said to be the most dangerous of the dangerous. I cannot guarantee that there will be no casualties. Do you understand? This subordinate understands, everyone said in unison. What Yili said was not a matter for them at all. How could there be no casualties on the battlefield? Yili nodded and said, all right, go prepare. We will gather at the second watch period. Yes. Wang Fei, these brats are too immature. Wang Fei, why do you care about them? Wei Lin said with dissatisfaction. These brats had been rude to Wang Fei in the past few days. If they died 100 times in the Wang Fu, it wouldn't be enough. Yili smiled faintly and said, it's a group of young people, and they're quite cute. Qin Feng and Wei Lin silently looked at each other. At the same time, they decided not to spread Wang Fei's evaluation. If the prince knew, these brats would die 100 times. Chapter 563. Before the second day of the night, a group of young soldiers had followed Yi Li's instructions and quietly led their men out of the camp. It wasn't that they were completely convinced by Yi Li's mysterious military advisor, but if they didn't follow Yi Li, they wouldn't be able to fight. Since it was already like this, they could only tactfully follow his instructions. It was unknown if this group of young soldiers had some ability or if Zhang Qilan was being courteous, but a few of them actually led their men out of the camp without missing a single one. When they stood in front of Yi Li, they couldn't help but raise their chins and feel a little proud. Yi Li only smiled faintly and nodded his head in satisfaction as he looked at the group of over 1,000 men. Military advisor? What are we going to do? Someone couldn't help but ask. In the darkness, Yi Li spread out a map on the ground and squatted down. He used the torch in his hand to point at a few places on the map and said, "General Zhang is leading his men to attract the attention of the enemy. You guys follow me to climb up from these 2 places and go around to the back of Jian Tianya." Someone frowned and said, "Since the military advisor already had a plan, why didn't you say so earlier? We could have sent men to scout the way." Yi Li looked at him and smiled. "Scout the way? Do you think that General Lu's men are wooden stakes and won't discover you guys? But we can't see the way at night. How are we going to get there?" Although they didn't know the details, they roughly knew where the path was after looking at the locations pointed out by the military advisor. This area was easy to defend and hard to attack. Even in the day, it was dangerous, much less at night. Yi Li stared at the young man who spoke and said, "That's why I said. I can't guarantee that there won't be any casualties. This is a battlefield." Everyone was shocked. That's right, this was a battlefield. On the battlefield, don't even talk about walking in the dark. Sometimes, even if one knew that they would die, they would still sacrifice their lives. Yi Li looked at them and said, "Those who aren't willing to go can still go back the way you came. I'll give you half an hour to communicate with your subordinates. I want to make it clear that it's not just dangerous to climb up. Even if we reach the cliff safely, it won't be a smooth journey. If you drop the ball on the road, you will be punished according to military law." In less than a quarter of an hour, everyone returned to Yi Li. Seeing that none of the teams retreated, Yi Li nodded in satisfaction. She turned around and said, "Let's go." Although it was already the second night watch period, the night wasn't tranquil. Not far away on a hillside, the 2 armies were engaged in a fierce battle. Taking advantage of this time, the group of people, led by Qin Feng and Yi Li, quietly climbed up the steep cliff path, with Wei Lin at the back. It wasn't a long journey, but it took them 2 hours to reach the top. Yi Li turned to look at the young people under the moonlight. Their clothes were messy but their eyes were bright. She nodded in satisfaction. Although their clothes were torn by the rocks, branches, and weeds on the mountain, and many people had scratches on their faces, no one was left behind. They also didn't make any big mistakes that would attract the attention of the enemy. It seemed that the Mahist army's daily training was very good. Because the entire mountain was guarded by the enemy, their group of more than 1,000 people was not a small number. They were even more careful after going up the mountain. They avoided the eyes and ears of the enemy along the way, and they only reached their destination at the 5th night watch period. When they reached their destination, before Yi Li could tell them to rest, a few figures flashed out from the shadows. Everyone was startled and quickly held their weapons. "Don't be nervous, we're on the same side." The person who came waved his hand and smiled. The 5th night watch period was the darkest time before dawn. Everyone couldn't see the person's face clearly and naturally didn't dare to let down their guard. Yi Li calmly said, "Feng San." Feng Xiao slowly walked over and smiled. "I didn't think that you guys would be able to make it here. I thought that if you guys couldn't make it, we would have to do it ourselves." Only when he walked closer did everyone see clearly that the person who came was Feng Xiao. "General Feng, how come you're here?" Feng Xiao smiled and said, "I've been here since the beginning. Wasn't I waiting for you guys?" "Young Master Chu, it's been hard on you." Yi Li rolled her eyes and asked, "How is it?" Feng Xiao said, Lu Jingxian plans to defend Qian Cliff to the death. Lu Jingxian has about 30,000 people under him, and at most 2,000 Black Cloud cavalry. Qian Cliff was a strategic location, and the Black Cloud cavalry couldn't be used here. It would be a waste to leave too many behind. Feng Zhiao looked at the group behind Yili and frowned. Why are there so few people? Yili said, do you think it's easy to bring people up here? These people are the most limited people. If we drag it out until dawn, we will definitely be discovered. Although we have covered it up a little, the other party may still discover traces of us after dawn. With a group of new recruits, the concealment along the way naturally wouldn't be too ingenious. If the other party's patrolling soldiers had sharp eyes, they would most likely discover traces of a large group of people walking along the way. Feng Zhiao also knew that he was being too demanding. He looked at Yi Li and asked, I only have 3,000 people here. What should we do? Yi Li smiled and said, there's nothing to do. Let's take this opportunity to set a fire behind their backs. If General Zhang grasps the opportunity well, he should be able to rush up. Feng Zhiao nodded and said, let's do it like that. Yi Li turned around and looked at the people behind her and said, rest here for an hour and then set off. The young general behind her said, military advisor, we are not tired. We can move now. Yi Li glanced at him indifferently, who cares if you are tired or not? In a while, General Zhang and the others will be fighting. We should take advantage of the moment before dawn to make a move. After causing chaos, we will retreat before the sky turns bright. The young general who spoke rashly blushed and sat down to rest in embarrassment. Feng Zhiao stood to the side and looked at the group of young fellows behind Yi Li with interest. He smiled and said, it seems that young Master Chu also has a time when he can't mix well. Feng Zhiao's eyes naturally saw that this group of young generals wasn't completely convinced by Yi Li. Yi Li didn't even bother to roll her eyes. She walked to a big tree and sat down to rest. There's no other way. I've let young Master Feng down. Sensing that Yi Li's mood wasn't very good, Feng Zhiao touched his nose and consciously turned around to find a place to close his eyes and rest. In the temporary tent outside Qian Cliff, Lu Jingxian sat in a chair and closed his eyes to rest. The generals next to him all had angry expressions. There are repeated sneak attacks every night. Do they still want people to rest? Not to mention that Zhang Qilan's subordinates were very depressed these days. Lu Jingxian's side wasn't relaxed either. They had the advantage of being on the high ground. Basically, the eastern troops had to pay the price of at least 5 or 6 people to injure one of them. Moreover, Zhang Qilan definitely wouldn't fight them to the death here. It was fine during the day, but when night came, the other side wouldn't stop tormenting. At night, they couldn't see. If they weren't careful, the other side could sneak up on them. Therefore, the soldiers stationed here couldn't help but be on high alert. After all, no one knew if the other side was just testing them or would really swarm them. After a few days, both sides couldn't help but get angry. Chapter 564. General, the prince sent a letter on horseback, someone reported from outside the tent. Lu Jingxian opened his eyes and scanned the rowdy crowd. He said in a deep voice, come in. A soldier came in and presented a letter with both hands. Lu Jingxian opened the letter and slowly frowned after reading it. The other generals changed their expressions and hurriedly asked, General, what orders does the prince have? LV Jingxian casually passed the letter to a deputy general sitting below him. The deputy general stilled when he saw it. He looked dazedly at Lu Jingxian and said, the prince is reminding general to be careful of the princess consort. The other people also passed the letter around. Lu Jingxian frowned and said, speaking of which, in the last few days, the princess consort has not appeared in the army at all. When the princess consort was mentioned, even though she was a woman, these generals who had fought on the battlefield still showed respect. It was not just because the princess consort had military talent that was different from other women, but also because the princess consort had done many things for the Mahist army in the last few years. For example, the promotion of soldiers, the payment of soldiers, the placement of wounded soldiers, and even the organization of the army. Many effective methods had been proposed and implemented by the princess consort. So in the eyes of these soldiers, Princess Ding was not as simple as a normal princess consort, but one of the true controllers of the Mahist army. For the prince to write a letter to remind her, this caused everyone to pay more attention to Princess Ding. But at this time, they did not know what Princess Ding was doing. At this time, Lu Jingxian found that he had overlooked an important person. It wasn't that LV Jingxian thought that Yi Li was better than Zhang Qilan when it came to commanding troops. It was just that Zhang Qilan had worked with him for more than 10 years, so they had a rough understanding of each other. But Princess Ding was an existence that they did not understand at all. The only understanding of Princess Ding was limited to the battle that she had defeated Genom of Gojoseon a few years ago. Of course, that battle was enough to make any general view her in a new light. There was a saying in the art of war, know thyself and know thy enemy to win 100 battles. For some reason, Lu Jingxian suddenly felt a little uneasy. Just as he was thinking about something with his head lowered, the sound of weapons and fighting could be heard from afar. Soon, a soldier came in and reported, "General, the enemy is attacking again. Fight back. Remind the soldiers at the front line not to lower their guard." LV Jingxian slapped the letter on the table. Then, he stood up and walked out of the tent. Not far away from the Sky Stream cliff, Yi Li looked down at the place where the flames were faintly burning. Behind her, the Sky Stream cliff was still peaceful. She slowly smiled and said in a deep voice, "Let's do it." Yes. Not long after, the fire on the mountain stream cliff soared into the sky. The originally tranquil place gradually became noisy. "General, look." Lu Jingxian, who had just walked out of the tent, turned back to look. His heart sank when he saw the blazing flames rising from Jian Tian Cliff. He thought that he knew where Princess Ding had gone. "General, is there a sneak attack on Jian Tian Cliff? Damn it, how did they get there?" There was a lot of noise before the battle. Lu Jingxian frowned and said in a deep voice, "Shut up. Deputy General, guard this place. I will lead the troops back to reinforce." Because he did not know how many people the enemy had on Jian Tian Cliff, Lu Jingxian did not want to take the risk. He could only lead the troops back to reinforce. He had more than 30,000 men and only 6,000 to 7,000 were left on Jian Tian Cliff. Once Jian Tian Cliff was lost, it would be meaningless for them to stay here. No one dared to argue. They quickly responded and mobilized their own troops. Zhang Qilan, who was at the foot of the hill, also saw the flames in the distance. Of course, it was not the flames on Jian Tian Cliff. It was a signal sent by Yi Li. A smile finally appeared on his calm and resolute face. He shouted, "Beat the drums." Before dawn, the sound of drums shook the sky in the dark night. Amidst the battle cries, the soldiers rushed up the hill like a tide. Lu Jingxian, who was rushing back on his horse, also heard the battle cries behind him. A helpless smile appeared on his face. The prince's reminder was too late. He was careless. Jian Tian Cliff was also in chaos. The soldiers who were still asleep hurriedly got up to face the enemy. Naturally, they were not a match for the soldiers who were holding their breath and waiting to attack. Moreover, these people did not have the intention to fight to the death with them. They just lit a fire and ran. If they met the enemy, they would fight if they could. If they could not fight, they would run. The soldiers who were woken up from their sleep were furious. However, they were not as smart as the enemy. They could only fight mindlessly in the chaos. At a high place not far from the battlefield, they could see the battlefield clearly with the help of the light from the fire. Feng Xiao stood beside Yi Li. He smiled and looked at the soldiers who were fighting hard below. He said with a smile, "These guys are not bad. It would be great if they could be this brave on the battlefield." This time, not only were the grassroots generals and young people participating in the drill, even the ordinary soldiers were mostly newcomers who had just joined the Mahist army in recent years. Although the former Mahist army veterans could not be said to have experienced hundreds of battles, most of them had been on the battlefield several times. This kind of drill was not as important to them as the new soldiers. Under the light of the fire, some of the soldiers were still fighting with swords and spears. Some had simply rolled on the ground and hugged each other to fight. Some even used tricks such as choking, biting ears, and so on. No wonder young Master Feng San, who always paid attention to his demeanor on the battlefield, was so happy that he laughed. Yi Li looked down calmly and said lightly, "At least they can be a little familiar with it. In the future, they will not panic on the battlefield. The ones who die the quickest on the battlefield are always the new soldiers." Feng Xiao stopped laughing and nodded. He said, "Wang Fei is right. General Liu has returned." A strange howl came from the night sky. Feng Xiao's expression became serious as he said solemnly. Yi Li nodded and looked at the sky. She said, "It's late. Let's retreat." Feng Xiao frowned and said, "But General Zhang." Yi Li said, "Lu Jingxian will probably call back at least half of his men. If General Zhang still can't attack, then we can't do anything. When General Lu's people arrive, we won't be able to leave. Let's go up the mountain." Feng Xiao was helpless. He knew that Yi Li was speaking the truth. He could only give the signal to retreat. The young soldiers who had been fighting excitedly were forcefully called back. They were all restless like little ponies. When Lu Jingxian rushed back to the main camp on Jiantian Cliff, the sky had already brightened. The originally neat and tidy camp now looked like it had been burned by fire and ravaged by bandits. Looking at the large groups of dead soldiers sitting in the center of the camp, LV Jingxian, who had not slept for the entire night, looked even worse. "Who's your general? How many people are there?" Lu Jingxian asked in a deep voice as he stared at a soldier of the East Army who was chatting among his own soldiers. The soldier stared blankly for a moment before quickly replying, reporting to the general, "This lowly one has already died in battle." The dead could not speak. Lu Jingxian's face couldn't help but twist. He gave a cold snort and left. The soldier frowned with worry. His face was full of confusion. He didn't say anything to make General Liu angry, right? On the mountain slope 20 li away, there was a fierce battle for position. However, the defending army, which had suddenly lost half of its men, was gradually showing signs of decline. On Jiantian Cliff, it was a different scene. The East Army would come and besiege them from time to time. When they were beaten back by the West Army, they would not continue to harass them. They would retreat and rest before coming back to continue the battle. If they were on the plains, this kind of provocation would be seeking their own deaths. However, on Jiantian Cliff, where the mountain was rugged and the path was rugged, sometimes there was no difference between 10,000 men and 3,000 men. By the time Lu Jingxian had a thorough understanding of the enemy's forces, there were less than 4,000 men after deducting those who had died in battle and stayed in his camp to eat and drink for free. It was too late for regrets. Because these 4,000 men were firmly blocking the main path leading to the outside reinforcements. Over 10,000 men could only watch as their own forces 20 li away were slowly wiped out by the enemy. The depressed Lu Jingxian swore to annihilate this group of people on Jiantian Cliff. As a result, a complicated battle for position began on Jiantian Cliff. There was only a small area on the main path leading out. Both sides were unable to mobilize their entire army. Thus, the West Army occupied the entrance. Before the reinforcements could leave the pass, they were suppressed by the East Army. The East Army occupied the entrance. In less than an hour, the West Army rushed up and continued the battle. Both sides suffered countless casualties. The most peculiar thing was that during the battle, both sides would fight to the death and use all kinds of methods. However, once it was determined that someone had died, everyone would be good brothers. They would sit on the side and continue to watch their comrades kill each other. This battle continued until the afternoon of the same day. The small entrance had been fought over 4 or 5 times by both sides. Both sides had suffered heavy losses. Yi Li and Feng Zhiyao's original 4,000 men had less than 2,000 left. Lu Jinxian's side had also lost close to 3,000 men. However, if Zhang Qilan could not take down the enemy in front of them by tomorrow morning, all their efforts would be for naught. They would all be wiped out. Therefore, after seeing Zhang Qilan's signal, Yi Li and Feng Zhiyao couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. However, Lu Jinxian's face darkened. The pass in front of them had been broken. There was no meaning in staying at the entrance in front of them. Lu Jingxian snorted and returned to the camp with a dark face. Looking at the back of Lu Jingxian from afar, Feng Zhiyao sat on a large smooth rock and laughed. Yi Li sat on the side and glanced at him. What made young Master Feng laugh like this? Feng Zhiyao sat up and said, what else could it be? Did Wang Fei not see Lu Jinxian's expression? That guy always boasted that he was the best commander of the Mahist army under the prince. He was only slightly convinced by Zhang Qilan. Right now, General Zhang is still 20 li away. After fighting for an entire day, he still doesn't know who his opponent is. Do you think his expression is good? Yi Li helplessly shook her head and said, we were lucky this time. If General Zhang was a few hours later. Young Master Feng, you and I would have become General Lu's captives. Feng Zhiyao rubbed his nose and complained, why didn't Wang Fei let Qilin participate in the battle? Yi Li smiled at him and said, this is a drill. If we use cheats in a drill, we might as well act. Cheats? What was that? Chapter 565. By the time Zhang Qilan brought his army to meet up with Yi Li and Feng Zhiyao, it would be another tough battle. However, it was better than what they had expected. At the very least, they were at the top of the cliff and not being suppressed by someone from a higher ground. Furthermore, Lu Jinxian's 30,000 men had already lost more than half of their numbers. However, they had lost less than 10% of their own men. Thinking of this, Zhang Qilan couldn't help but want to laugh out loud. Outside a small city several kilometers away, Mo Xiaoyao sighed helplessly as he stood outside the camp and looked at the small city that was isolated and had its gates tightly shut. Yun Ting and Qin Yun beside him looked at the prince strangely, not understanding why the prince sighed. In the end, Yun Ting couldn't hold back his words and couldn't help but ask, Your Highness, is there something troubling you? Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and said, I'm afraid Lu Jingxian won't be able to hold on for much longer. Not knowing Yun Ting, even the usually calm Qin Yun didn't believe it. He frowned and said, the cliff is a dangerous place. Even if General Zhang has 100,000 men, he won't be able to do anything. Why is Prince? Mo Xiaoyao handed the battle report to Qin Yun and said, ever since Zhang Qilan arrived, Li and Feng San have not appeared. I'm afraid that the two of them have taken a detour behind Lu Jingxian. If that's the case, Lu Jinxian's defense in the first 20 li of the cliff will be useless. Once the two armies reach the cliff, even if Zhang Qilan's 100,000 men can't do anything, they can take turns to grind Lu Jinxian's 10 to 20,000 men to death. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, Qin Yun and Yun Ting's expressions changed. Yun Ting said, Prince, I'm willing to go and reinforce General Lu. Mo Xiaoyao looked at him and said indifferently, reinforce? Where are we going to get reinforcements? What's more, even if I give you 10 or 20,000 men, what can they do in front of an army of 100,000? Yun Ting was speechless. Then what should we do? Mo Xiaoyao turned his gaze to the isolated city in front of them and said in a low voice, attack the city with full force. We must take down this city before Zhang Qilan's men arrive. Qin Yun and Yun Ting's expressions were solemn as they stood up and said, this subordinate obeys. Although Mo Xiaoyao said that he would attack the city with all his might, this small city was not that easy to take down. Yuan Pei was a veteran of the Mahist army and was especially good at defending cities. In a situation where Mo Xiaoyao didn't have the advantage in numbers, as long as Yuan Pei didn't care about anything else and waited for reinforcements, Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Even if Emo Xiaoyao had 1,000 plans, Yuan Pei was as steady as a mountain and didn't care about anything. Even if Yun Ting and the others cursed at him every day, the people on the city walls didn't open the city gates and couldn't do anything about it. On the cliff of Jiantian, the two armies faced off for 4 to 5 days before they finally wiped out Lu Jinxian's 10,000 men. Lu Jingxian was personally captured by Zhang Qilan. The two of them had worked together for more than 10 years and had often fought with each other. Although he lost to Zhang Qilan this time, Lu Jingxian didn't feel ashamed. Seeing his subordinates completely annihilated, LV Jingxian, who was exhausted from the battle, threw away his weapon and said to Zhang Qilan, who was extremely proud of himself, "I lost." Zhang Qilan pulled him up with a face full of smiles and chuckled. "Victory and defeat are common in battle. Don't take it to heart." Lu Jingxian snorted softly and said, "You definitely couldn't have broken through my defenses so quickly. Where is Wang Fei?" The young generals watching stilled. The Prince Ding mansion still had a former Princess Wang Fei because she was unwilling to leave the Dechu state. Emo Xiaoyao had ordered Leng Haoyu to protect her in secret. But in the minds of the Mahist army, there was only one Wang Fei right now. But how come they didn't know that the Wang Fei was in their army? Everyone's gaze looked at Zhang Qilan. Who told him to be the main general? If even he didn't know the whereabouts of the Wang Fei, then no one else would. Zhang Qilan laughed dryly and looked at Yi Li, who had come with Feng Xiao. Lu Jingxian stilled and didn't recognize Yi Li. But he was very familiar with Qin Feng and Wei Lin, who were following behind Yi Li. It was clear who it was that both Qin Feng and Wei Lin were following at the same time. When he looked closely at Yi Li, who was standing next to Feng Xiao, he immediately felt that it was the Wang Fei. This subordinate greets Wang Fei. Lu Jingxian went forward and bowed. Yi Li grimaced helplessly. Looking at the petrified crowd in front of her, she said, "General Lu, rise." Lu Jingxian raised his hands in a bow and said with a smile, "This one accepts defeat at Wang Fei's hands." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "General overpraises." Yi Li just did her best. Lu Jingxian didn't care. In any case, he definitely wouldn't admit that he had lost to Zhang Qilan, at least not to his face. This one doesn't have anything else to do, so this one will take his people and leave first. I wish Wang Fei a safe journey. Yi Li nodded and said, "Many thanks for General's auspicious words." Seeing Lu Jingxian leave confidently with the soldiers who had been declared dead, the remaining people were silent. Was it really alright to wish the main general of the enemy a safe journey? After passing through Jiantian Cliff, even though the road behind them wasn't flat, it was still very calm. They didn't dare to delay at all. The group of people sprinted towards the isolated city to help Yuan Pei. At this time, on the walls of the small isolated city, Emo Xiaoyao was dressed in white. He wasn't even wearing his battle robes. He looked at the old General Yuan Pei and said with a smile, "Old General, this time I won." The white-haired General Yuan Pei looked at the man in front of him whose hair was as white as snow but still as proud as the wind. A thread of relief and joy flashed through his eyes. He nodded and said, "It is true that Prince has won." This old man admits defeat. In terms of military strength, Emo Xiaoyao was only slightly better than Yuan Pei. Attacking a city was much harder than defending it. Back then, Shi Ling's army of more than 100,000 had not been able to break through a small city in Jiangxia. Now, Prince Ding had broken through in a few short days. This was his ability. Yuan Pei was not a person who refused to admit defeat because of old age. He felt very gratified that the Ding King's household had a successor. If this was a real battlefield, I would not have been able to take this city so easily. This isolated city was truly isolated because it was a newly built city. There hadn't even been time for residents to move in. And on a battlefield, there wouldn't be a city that had basically nothing. Yuan Pei laughed loudly and said, "Many thanks to Prince." But if this was a real battlefield, Prince wouldn't have only brought a few tens of thousands of troops to attack a city, right? The two looked at each other and smiled. Clearly, they were in a good mood. Reporting to Prince, there are troops coming this way. A soldier on the city wall rushed over to report. Oh? Mo Xiaoyao looked over. In the distance, there was indeed the sound of hooves and dust rising. In less than an hour, Yi Li, Feng Xiao, and Zhang Qilan had already led their troops to the city. Mo Xiaoyao looked around and saw at least 80 to 90,000 troops. He couldn't help but praise, to be able to wipe out Lu Jinxian's troops with less than 20,000 losses. That's not bad. Looking down at the people below, he smiled faintly and said, General Zhang, Feng San, Li, you've come too late. Feng Xiao gritted his teeth in regret. Looking at the situation, if they had come 2 to 4 hours earlier, the situation would have been very different. Unfortunately, on the battlefield, the difference of half an hour could often completely change the outcome of a battle. Princess. Chapter 566. Yi Li raised her head to look at the man in white on the city wall. Her lips slowly curved into a faint smile. She raised her right hand slightly. Her soft voice spread across the entire battlefield, attack. On the city gate tower, Mo Xiaoyao looked helplessly at the army that was preparing to attack the city. Yuan Pei, who was standing at the side, couldn't help but laugh. He looked at Mo Xiaoyao with a smile and said, Your Highness, it seems that this battle isn't over yet. Mo Xiaoyao smiled bitterly, Old General is right. I celebrated too early. According to the rules of the drill would end when the city was breached. They had won. But since it was a drill, they had to train the new soldiers as much as possible. Furthermore, there was no rule on the battlefield that said a city couldn't be taken back after it was breached. As a result, the curtain was raised on a large-scale siege battle once again. This time, the siege was even more difficult than Mo Xiaoyao's previous siege. The two sides fought for 7 days without a victor being decided. In the end, they could only announce a draw. This was because Mo Xiaoyao's city had no more rations. This was a completely isolated city. Even though there were no civilians who needed extra rations, it also meant that there was no other food in the city other than the rations they brought with them. As for Yuan Pei, he had already destroyed the food that originally belonged to the defenders on the day the city was breached. Not only did Mo Xiaoyao's subordinates suffer heavy losses, they even had no food to eat and could only defend the city with empty stomachs. The soldiers outside the city weren't doing any better. In a moment of carelessness, Mo Xiaoyao's men destroyed most of their rations. In the end, neither side was willing to admit defeat. Seeing that they were about to run out of energy, Old General Yuan Pei could only call for a halt. In the end, the two sides agreed to a draw. When Prince Ding and Princess Ding announced the end of the drill, many soldiers couldn't help but cry tears of joy. Of course, this wasn't because they thought they had won. It was because they could finally eat. Obviously, there was a large amount of food and fodder piled up outside the city, but they had to watch their dead brothers eat and drink well while lying to themselves that they had run out of food. These days were 10 times, 100 times worse than when they ran out of food. As soon as the drill was over, no one cared about anything else. They set up camp on the spot, buried pots, and cooked rice. The soldiers who had been fighting fiercely just now were all on good terms with each other. Especially when he saw that the other party's eyes were also green from hunger, a special kind of comrade in arms spontaneously arose in his heart. In the small city, the generals who had just finished eating and drinking also gathered together. Because the siege had lasted for too long, even Lu Jingxian, who had already returned, came back to watch the battle. Now that the battle was over, both sides had their own victories and defeats. No one had lost face, so the atmosphere was still harmonious. But the young generals of the Eastern Army that had been with Yi Li looked at Yi Li, who was still dressed in white, and their eyes were still dazed. A few days ago, they had been so busy with the battle that they didn't have the mind to care. Now that the battle was over, the young men finally remembered that the white-clothed young master that they had intentionally or unintentionally pushed aside and made them promise General Liu was the Wang Fei that they had always respected. This strong impact made the group of young men feel uncomfortable. Wang Fei. The young men pushed each other and finally pushed out an unlucky person, Wang Fei. This subordinate was blind before and offended Wang Fei. Wang Fei, please punish us. Zhang Qilan glanced at the incompetent juniors and said, "You brats still have the face to say this? This old man had repeatedly told you to be polite to Wang Fei. What did you do?" Everyone stared at him silently. "You were talking about Mr. Chu and not Wang Fei?" Seeing the aggrieved gazes of the young people, Zhang Qilan was silent. He snickered and looked at Yi Li, saying, "That Wang Fei." This subordinate did not explain this to them clearly. "Wang Fei, please do not take offense." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "General Zhang is too serious. This was originally my intention. Also, it is hard for young people to not be young and impetuous. General Zhang and the other generals have taught well. These young generals are all good seedlings." Being praised by Wang Fei, everyone felt their lips twitch. They were young, but compared to Wang Fei, who was just 21 or 22 years old, most of them were older. Being called young and impetuous by Wang Fei, they couldn't help but blush. On the side, Yun Ting was complaining inside, "What are you all doing?" When he met Wang Fei was only 15 or 16 years old. With Yi Li's praise, the other generals also revealed smiles on their faces. Even though these young people were following Zhang Qilan this time, they were not all Zhang Qilan's subordinates. Among them were Lu Jingxian, Yuan Pei, and even Sun Yan's subordinates who were stationed at Feihong Pass. They were all elites of the young generation. When they were praised, as their superiors, the generals felt they had face. Hearing Wang Fei say that she would not blame them, the young people all sighed in relief. The young people were very curious. Even though they were far away, they thought that they were secretly examining Wang Fei. After all, they had heard of Princess Ding's deeds before they had entered the Mahist army. Who would have thought that there would be a day when they would be able to see and even fight side by side with Princess Ding? But they did not know that their actions, which they thought were secretive, had already caused someone to be displeased. So much so that when they returned to the army, before they could even breathe properly, they were thrown into some training camp for 2 or 3 months. They could only think of it as the generals being dissatisfied with their performance in the drill. After the drill ended, Zhang Qilan and Lu Jingxian were left to clean up. Mo Xiaoyao took Yi Li, Feng Xiao and the others back to Li City. She had just returned to Ding Wangfu and had yet to enter the study when she met young Master Qing Chen, who was walking towards her. She only needed to look at his expression to know that young Master Qing Chen was very dissatisfied with a certain irresponsible Wang Yi who had thrown the affairs of the Northwest to him. Her gaze calmly swept over Mo Xiaoyao, who looked better than usual after half a month of marching and fighting. Su Qingchen asked faintly, "It seems that Prince has been well these days?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said in a good mood, "I haven't moved for many years. It's good to move around." Su Qingchen smiled faintly. "What? Then congratulations to Prince. In the future, Prince will be able to move around more often." What did she mean? Mo Xiaoyao looked at Su Qingchen in confusion. Su Qingchen sighed and waved the battle report she had just received. The Dechu State's army has been losing battles in the north. In less than a month, they have already lost 4 cities to the north. Mo Xiaoyao was silent for a moment. He raised his head and smiled faintly at Su Qingchen. "This has nothing to do with us. The Mahist army and the Dechu state had already broken off all ties. How the Dechu state fought had nothing to do with them." Su Qingchen nodded and said faintly, "As long as Prince knows what to do, it's fine." In addition, the northern tribes have sent news. The northern tribes are also restless. Once the Dechu state is unfavorable to the war in the north, the northern tribes will definitely invade the south next spring. As Mo Xiaoyao listened to Su Qingchen's words, he continued to walk toward the study. He asked, "What news is there from Nanzhao?" Su Qingchen said, "The heir of Genom of Gojoseon has led an army of 300,000 and is already stationed at the Nanzhao border. The two countries are in a standoff. It is unknown when the war will begin." "Will the war begin?" Mo Xiaoyao turned back and asked. Su Qingchen was silent for a moment. She replied in a low voice, "Yes." Mo Xiaoyao paused and said, "Good. Once the war begins, the Shilling will not have time to attend to anything else for a while." Following behind him, Feng Zhiyao frowned and asked, "Prince, shouldn't we also prepare?" Mo Xiaoyao thought for a moment and nodded. Chapter 567. War wasn't something that could be started immediately. Although there were signs of war outside the Northwest region, the people in the Northwest region were still living their lives peacefully and warmly. Because they believed that no matter what happened, as long as the Mahist army was there, the flames of war would not ignite in their homeland. As for the officials and generals in the Prince Ding mansion, they were well aware that the peace in front of them would not last for long. They all secretly rubbed their palms together in preparation. In the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaoyao did not seem to be worried about the situation outside. After the military exercise ended, he rewarded the soldiers who deserved to be rewarded and threw the people who needed to be fixed elsewhere. Then, he returned to the Prince Ding mansion to be a peaceful prince. Every day, other than dealing with political matters, he would pester Yi Li to bully Mo Xiaobao. He was extremely carefree. Today, Mo Xiaobao, who had been given a rare day off by Mr. Qing Yun, was once again bullied by his unscrupulous father. His eyes were wet as he looked at his mother with grievance. Yi Li could not help but sigh helplessly. This father and son seemed to be unable to interact peacefully for more than 2 hours. Mo Xiaobao was still young and did not have enough fighting strength. He could only be bullied without any strength to retaliate. If it was a normal person, they would probably stay as far away as possible from Mo Xiaoyao. However, Mo Xiaobao had to face difficulties. When there were no difficulties, he would create difficulties for himself. He was defeated time and time again. Seeing Mo Xiaobao pretending to be pitiful, the unscrupulous father sitting on the couch snorted in disdain. Pretending to be pitiful? Those were all leftovers from I. Of course, Prince Ding would never admit that at that time, because compared to Mo Xiaobao's round, white, tender, and innocent appearance, the effect of him pretending to be pitiful was greatly reduced. Furthermore, was it appropriate for a father to compete with his son in pretending to be pitiful? It was too undignified. Thus, Prince Ding firmly rejected this option. Speaking of which, Prince, as a father, it wasn't appropriate for him to bully a 5-year-old child just because he was older than his son, right? As for what happened afterwards, Mo Xiaoyao learned the art of acting pitiful on his own. In the end, he evolved into a little white cat who pretended to be a pig to eat a tiger. He looked pure on the outside, but he was incomparably scheming on the inside. This really made Mo Xiaoyao's stomach ache for a while. This was not something he could have predicted. Yi Li bent over and picked up her tearful son. She gently rubbed his little head and said, "Be good, Xiaobao. Mother will take you out to play. Let's not play with father anymore." Mo Xiaobao immediately reaches out his hands to hug Yi Li's neck, his smile incomparably brilliant. "Nyangqin is the best, Xiaobao loves Nyangqin the most." Yi Li was speechless. She knew that this brat was just pretending. However, not many people could stand that pitiful look even if it was just an act. Sometimes, Yi Li couldn't help but think, in the end, who did this child's temperament resemble? She and Mo Xiaoyao were not people who would reveal their emotions in front of others. Although Mo Xiaoyao loved to put on an act from time to time, Yi Li bet that when Mo Xiaoyao was a child, he definitely didn't reach the stage where he could cry whenever he wanted to. If this lively temperament was somewhat similar to Su Qingyan, but when Su Qingyan was 5 years old, his mind might not even be as sharp as Mo Xiaobao's little finger. Xiaobao, come down. Father has something to say to you. On the soft couch, Missouri Xiaoyao slightly squints his eyes, smiling incomparably amiably as he beckons to Mo Xiaobao. Mo Xiaobao's intuition was not good. He tightly hugs Yi Li's neck and repeatedly shakes his head. He simply buries his little face into Yi Li's neck. Mo Xiaoyao didn't get angry. He chuckles and says, "You really don't want to listen? You won't regret it? If you regret it in the future, don't say that this father doesn't love you and didn't remind you." Mo Xiaobao secretly perks up his ears. Incomparably conflicted, he secretly turns his head to look at Mo Xiaoyao, who is still lying on the soft couch with his eyes closed. He only hears Mo Xiaoyao mutter to himself, "Speaking of which, in the past, your father almost grew up to look like Zhang Qilan. If it wasn't for your grandfather, my father, who reminded me, our Prince Ding mansion's handsome appearance would have been cut off." Mo Xiaobao's face pales. Grow up to look like General Zhang. Zhang Qilan's appearance appeared in his mind. Mo Xiaobao repeatedly shakes his head to dispel this frightening image. It wasn't that Zhang Qilan's appearance was unpresentable. General Zhang's facial features were good and his figure was tall and imposing. No matter where he was placed, he would not be able to escape the praise of having a dignified appearance. But Mo Xiaobao's requirements for himself were exceptionally high. Even if he couldn't grow up to look like eldest uncle, there was still Feng San, Han Mingxi, or his father to choose from. General Zhang's appearance really didn't fit Mo Xiaobao classmates' aesthetic standards. Thus, for the sake of his future beauty, Mo Xiaobao kicks his little feet to make Yi Li put him down. He stands vigilantly in front of Mo Xiaoyao. After waiting for a while, Mo Xiaoyao lazily opens his eyes. He glances at Mo Xiaobao from the corner of his eyes for a long while before slowly reaching out to pinch Mo Xiaobao's round little face. Pinch. 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 Mo Xiaobao angrily glares at his father and whimpers. Although it doesn't hurt too much, it means that he once again lost to this man in front of his mother. Mo Xiaoyao sits up and moves closer to Mo Xiaobao to carefully examine the little face that is red from his pinch. He gives a sinister smile. "Do you know that you are very fat? You still dare to ask your mother to hug you? There will be a day when your mother will be tired out by a little fatty like you. Look at how chubby you are, you still dare to eat meat every day. Your father was not even half as fat as you when I was 5 years old. Tell me, when you grow up, will you be even fatter than Zhang Qilan? I think you don't need to be called Mo Xiaobao anymore. How about changing your name to Mo de Fatty?" Hearing this, Mo Xiaobao lowers his head to look at his round, white and tender little hands. His fragile little heart is finally shattered by his own imagination. He looks at Mo Xiaoyao with grief and indignation before running away in tears. "Woo woo. Eldest uncle, father bullies me, Xiaoyao." Yi Li frowns, indifferently looking at the man who is lying on the soft couch laughing to the point of convulsing back and forth. How can you talk to a child like that? It's easy to hurt a child's self-esteem. Moreover, Mo Xiaobao is not as exaggerated as he says. It's just that his grandfather, Qin Yun, who loves him dearly, raised him too well. He looks slightly stronger than other children. It's a good thing for children to be a little chubbier. Mo Xiaoyao humphs, "I'm doing it for his own good. It's about time for him to officially start practicing martial arts. If he grows too fat, the one suffering is himself. When he comes back in the future, Li will make more vegetarian dishes." Yi Li facepalms. After all is said and done, it's still because she personally made all the meat dishes that her son likes last night. She slightly neglected a certain someone. Who told Mo Xiaobao to not be happy without meat, while Mo Xiaoyao prefers vegetarian dishes? When Xiaobao comes back to the academy, I'll personally make your favorite dishes, okay? Yi Li says. Compared to those wives who wash their hands and make soup for their husbands, Yi Li rarely cooks. Mo Xiaoyao nods in satisfaction and says, "Only for me." Yi Li nods and warns, "You're not allowed to bully Xiaobao. Mo Xiaoyao waves his hand and says, "Don't worry, that brat's zodiac sign is a cockroach. After a while, he'll happily run back by himself." Yi Li is speechless. Her watery eyes flashed with a trace of sharpness. She reaches out and pinches his waist. Meeting Mo Xiaoyao's puzzled gaze, Yi Li smiles sinisterly. "If Xiaobao's zodiac sign is a cockroach, then what's your zodiac sign?" Chapter 568. Sure enough, in less than half an hour, student Mo Xiaobao happily appears in front of Yi Li, bashfully looking at Yi Li. He wants to say something but hesitates. Yi Li holds back her laughter, looking at her son and asks, "What does Xiaobao want to say?" Mo Xiaobao shyly says, "Uncle said, even if Xiaobao really grows up to be like General Zhang, even if the whole world dislikes Xiaobao, mother will not dislike Xiaobao." Yi Li secretly glares at Mo Xiaoyao and says with a smile, "Of course, no matter what Xiaobao becomes, he will always be mother's darling. In this world, there is no mother who will dislike her own child." Mo Xiaobao's eyes light up, firmly nodding his head. "Child knows, child won't eat meat in the future." Yi Li touches her son's little face and says, "Of course you still have to eat meat, but you still have to eat some meat and vegetables. You can't be picky like yesterday, do you understand?" Child knows. Then. Student Xiaobao is shy. Can mother still hug Xiaobao? Mo Xiaoyao has a toothache. In the end, who did this scoundrel learn from? From ancient times until now, his Prince Ding mansion has never had such a strange breed. Was that bashful look really acceptable? Su Qingchen. It's definitely him who taught Mo Xiaobao bad things. You just wait for me. Yi Li smiles. Of course you can. Mo Xiaobao solemnly nods his head. Xiaobao has grown up. I don't need mother to hug me. Xiaobao can hug mother. But right now, Xiaobao is still small. Let mother hug. He is really too considerate and filial. Yi Li's heart is as soft as the clouds in the sky. She bends over and hugs Mo Xiaobao to sit on her lap, lowering her head to kiss him. Mother will remember Xiaobao's words. Originally, she said she would take Mo Xiaobao out to play, but behind them, there is a Prince Ding who doesn't do his job and wants to follow them in the name of protecting his wife and child. In the carriage, Mo Xiaobao lies on his mother's lap, representing his uncle to despise his father. Mo Xiaoyao didn't mind at all. He raised his eyebrows and laughed. "Kid, what do you know? This was called making the best use of people and things." It could also be said that he knew how to make good use of people. "Since your uncle and uncle are so powerful, why should I work myself to death to deal with those chores? I, your father, am the most powerful person in the Northwest. I only need to set a direction and goal. Naturally, there will be countless people working hard to achieve this goal." Slacking off. Uncle said that an emperor who is lazy and ignores the affairs of the court is an incapable ruler. Therefore, a prince who is lazy and ignores the affairs of the court is also an incapable ruler. The little white bun sat on Yi Li's knees and seriously discussed the issue of diligent government. "Please say that I have managed my subordinates well, thank you," Mo Xiaoyao said lazily, looking at his son who was trying to argue with reason. "Silly boy, you don't even know that you've been tricked by your uncle. He's clearly afraid that you'll be like your father and not do anything when you grow up and implicate him. However, your father won't let you become like me, because I'm still waiting for you to take over my position when you grow up. At that time, I will take Miss Li and fly far away. Hug my wife, dream on." The little bun who didn't know that after being tricked by his father, he was tricked by his uncle opened his eyes wide. Of course not. Uncle said that diligent government makes a good emperor. Everything his uncle said was right. Thank you for the reminder, but your father, I am not an emperor. Mo Xiaoyao said with waning interest. Although he had learned many things, the 5-year-old little bun still didn't completely understand the difference between a prince and an emperor. Moreover, in the Northwest, the difference between an emperor and a prince wasn't that big. Classmate Mo Xiaobao's understanding was that there were many princes in other places, so princes had to listen to the emperor. However, there was only one prince in the northwest, his father, and he didn't have to listen to the emperor. Therefore, his father, this prince, was one of a kind and was also the greatest prince in the world. What was so great about being an emperor? Xiling had one, Dechu state had one, and northern Rong and southern Zhao had one each. The more emperors there were, the less valuable they were. However, there was only one Prince Ding. If he wanted to be one, he had to be the most unique and most valuable one. Mo Xiaobao's strange concept directly caused the establishment of an empire to be delayed by many, many years. Unable to outtalk his father, Mo Xiaobao proudly turned his head and fell into his mother's embrace. Mo Xiaoyao ignored him and looked at him with a smile. "Son, your great-grandfather must have told you many history books. In history, there were emperors who went to court every 10 days to half a month and still had the country prospering. There were also emperors who woke up in the middle of the night and still had their country destroyed. Therefore, whether an emperor is good or bad has nothing to do with whether you are diligent or not." Mo Xiaobao thought about it and crawled out of his mother's embrace. He nodded and said, "I know, it also has to do with being smart." The idiot that father mentioned who woke up in the middle of the night was the idiot emperor of Dechu state. After saying this, Mo Xiaobao nodded heavily to confirm his own thoughts. Seeing him so serious, Mo Xiaoyao couldn't help but laugh. He said with a smile, "How do you know it's that idiot? His country hasn't been destroyed yet." Mo Jingqi did wake up in the middle of the night and sleep in the middle of the night, but it wasn't necessarily because he was diligent. Mo Xiaoyao felt that it was more because he was guarding against this and that and couldn't sleep. Mo Xiaobao said seriously, "Of course he's an idiot. He chased father away, he also chased granduncle and uncle away. He also likes the worst Prime Minister Lu's family and doesn't like Wu Jiejie's mother. Even his own mother and younger brother don't like him. Wu Jiejie also doesn't like him. Eldest uncle says this is called destroying the Great Wall. Feng San says this is called asking for death." Yi Li, who originally found it interesting, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What kind of nonsense did he learn? Along the way, they chatted and laughed. Time passed quickly and unknowingly, it was already noon. The horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of a mountain. After getting off the carriage, they had to walk the rest of the way. Mo Xiaoyao naturally couldn't let Yi Li carry Mo Xiaobao, who was about to become fat, for such a long distance, so he could only carry him himself. Mo Xiaobao didn't feel uncomfortable in his father's arms at all. He calmly laid down and curiously looked at everything in front of him while asking, "Mother, where are we going?" Yi Li faintly smiled and said, "You'll know when we get there." Actually, the father and son's relationship wasn't that bad. Although they usually quarreled, it could be seen that Mo Xiaobao didn't have any grudges against his unkind father. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so happy lying in his father's arms. The group walked into the mountain. In less than 5 li, the road gradually became more heavily guarded. The deeper they went, the stricter the security became. Along the way, the guards all bowed to the two. Until they were stopped at a checkpoint. Token, password. Mo Xiaoyao knew this place before, but because he gave full authority to Yi Li, he didn't really come here. Hearing this, he couldn't help being surprised. With a smile, he said, "I also need a token and password." The guards at the checkpoint didn't move at all. Token, password. Mo Xiaoyao raised an eyebrow as he looked at Yi Li. With his sharp senses, he could naturally feel that there were at least several hundred arrows pointing in their direction. If there wasn't a token and password, Mo Xiaoyao didn't doubt that these soldiers would really shoot arrows. Yi Li took out a very unique-looking token and handed it over to the soldier. "Soldier's spirit, return the token." The soldier looked at the token and confirmed its authenticity before returning it to her. "Wu Wei, I'm not afraid. Princess, please come in." After entering, they passed through 3 or 4 similar checkpoints on the way. The password for each checkpoint was completely different. Adding on the advantage of the terrain and this kind of defense, even Mo Xiaoyao didn't have the confidence to say that they could enter unharmed. Li, I'm really more and more curious about what is inside. This mysterious place wasn't far from Glass City, but no one would have thought that this originally unremarkable place was the true tomb of the previous dynasty's great ancestor, or rather, the location of the treasure. This tomb wasn't as grand as a normal emperor's tomb. It couldn't even be compared to the empty tomb near Hong Province. It could barely be considered a huge underground palace built in the mountains. There were no beautiful marble decorations, no gold, silver, jewels, or rare treasures. It was just like an ordinary underground palace. If people came in looking for treasures, they would definitely be disappointed. And now, there were already a lot of people busily walking in and out of this place. Mo Xiaoyao curiously looked at these people busily making some strange metal tools. Especially in the innermost area, many people were gathered together to study a hollow copper pillar that was as thick as a person. Even though he didn't know what it was, but looking at the hollow copper pillar, for some reason, Mo Xiaoyao intuitively felt a trace of danger. Calmly moving away from the hole in the copper pillar, Mo Xiaoyao turned to look at Yi Li and raised his brows. Li, this is the thing left behind by the previous dynasty's great ancestor? To be honest, I really don't understand what this thing is. Yi Li looked at him and softly sighed. Actually, I also don't understand whether this is good or not. When she first came here and saw the thing left behind by the previous dynasty's great ancestor, she was shocked. At the same time, she was a bit hesitant. Without natural development, was it really good to let the cold weapon era enter the hot weapon era? Presumably, that senior was also hesitant, so this place had never been truly used. Therefore, in the history of the previous dynasty, she had never seen anything that shouldn't have appeared in this era. Then, does Li understand now? Mo Xiaoyao asked with a smile. Yi Li smiled faintly. Let nature take its course. Chapter 569. Yes, let nature take its course. If Yi Li had not been reborn into this era that she was completely unfamiliar with, but into a dynasty in history, she would not have hesitated. She would definitely take out these things without any hesitation. So what if she pushed forward the course of history? It would not be worse than the original history. Right now, Yi Li did not hesitate for long. She was not a person that liked to be conflicted. It was just that no matter if it was Emperor Gaozu of the previous dynasty or herself, they did not have much understanding of the military industry. She didn't know the original identity of the previous dynasty's great ancestor, but even if Yi Li knew the structure of all the most advanced weapons in the world like the back of her hand, it didn't mean that she could create the exact same weapon. Needless to say, he couldn't solve the problem of materials alone. Therefore, Yi Li did not treat this place as a place where weapons of mass destruction could be mass-produced on the battlefield. Instead, she used the most basic knowledge that the skilled craftsmen of this era could understand to give them a completely different concept from the current era. Yi Li did not need them to immediately create an AK-47 or long-range missile. They only needed to work hard in this direction. No matter if it was 100 years or 100 years, Yi Li believed that with these seeds, this land would not encounter what her hometown had experienced in the future. Wang Fei. A middle-aged man walked over. When he saw Yi Li, his eyes lit up and he rushed over with a fanatical expression. Mo Xiaoyao held Mo Xiaobao as he coldly stared at the charging man. He narrowed his eyes in displeasure and stepped in front of Yi Li. The charging man stopped in his tracks. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao's gloomy expression, he knew that his actions just now had been rude. He could only awkwardly stand there, not knowing what to do. Yi Li walked out from behind Mo Xiaoyao and said with a faint smile, "Master Li, what is it?" The middle-aged man quickly said, "We have made the things Wang Fei gave us, but there are some questions we want to ask Wang Fei." Yi Li nodded and said, "Then let's go take a look together." Placed in front of Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao was a pistol. Mo Xiaoyao was naturally unfamiliar with the things in front of him, but Yi Li's eyes flashed with a trace of nostalgia and joy. She walked up and picked up the gun on the table. To be honest, Yi Li had seen all sorts of advanced weaponry in her previous life. The gun in front of her was so crude that it was unbearable to look at. Compared to the earliest automatic handguns in the world in his previous life, it was much cruder. However, it only took them 5 years to go through the hundreds of years of evolution in the history of firearms. Yi Li believed that these skilled craftsmen had done their best to create such a weapon. Picking up the pistol, Yi Li turned around and smiled at Xiaobao. "Xiaobao, cover your ears." Mo Xiaobao looked curiously at the thing in his mother's hand, but he still obediently covered his ears with his little hands. The pistol spun in Yi Li's hand. Yi Li's eyes changed as she raised the gun and fired 3 shots at the target not far away. After the 3 loud bangs, Yi Li looked at the target in front of her and slightly frowned. The first shot had hit the bullseye, the second shot had only hit the 4th ring, and the third shot had missed. Of course, this was not a problem with Yi Li's marksmanship. It was clear that this was a problem with the gun itself. Master Li, who was following behind, still had a burning gaze, but this time, he was not looking at Yi Li, but at the gun in her hand. This thing that Yi Li disliked was as precious as a peerless beauty in his eyes. Master Li scratched his beard in annoyance and said, "We've made 2 of these things, and one of them just exploded. This one is fine, but we can't hit it. The more we hit, the more we missed. There really hasn't been anyone like Wang Fei who has hit the bullseye on the first try. However, the second and third shots were clearly not good." The difference was so great that he couldn't help but wonder if Wang Fei's first shot was an accident. It seems like it's a problem with the materials. As for suggestions for improvement, I will organize them for you later. I'll have to trouble you to worry about the materials. I will order people to send all the needed minerals. I can't do anything else. She was not a military expert, nor was she an expert in military materials. She could only give them the general information she knew and some concepts and theories. They had to explore the rest step by step. Master Li felt some regret, but he knew he could not force this and could only nod in agreement. Master Li, who had a lot on his mind, left, but he left the gun behind. Even though this was the first finished product they had made, because the results were not satisfactory, Master Li did not feel any heartache and kept it. He even encouraged himself to make better things when they returned. Yi Li took out the remaining bullets in the gun before throwing it to Mo Xiaobao, who had been eagerly waiting to play. Receiving the new toy, Mo Xiaobao immediately focused all his attention on the thing in his hands. He did not care about his father holding him in his arms and not letting him come down to play. This is something left behind by the previous Emperor Gaozu. Mo Xiaoyao looked around and asked. Yi Li nodded. She looked at Mo Xiaoyao and asked, "Xiaoyao, what do you think of this gun?" Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and looked at the thing in Mo Xiaobao's hands, saying, "It has no practical value. Its range was not as far as the arrows of a master archer." Even though the first shot had made him interested, the last 2 shots had made him disappointed. For now, it has no practical value. Yi Li nodded in agreement and pulled Mo Xiaoyao forward. The things that the previous emperor had prepared naturally were not just these. Even Yi Li herself didn't know much about it, and it wasn't like she didn't have anything that had practical value. As they walked into an empty room, the smell of sulfur greeted them. In the corner of the room, there were several wooden boxes neatly placed. Yi Li walked over and opened the topmost box. There were some black spherical things in the box. Mo Xiaoyao pondered for a moment before saying, "This is gunpowder?" It was not that this era did not have gunpowder. There were already people who used it in war. However, gunpowder needed to be ignited with fire and its killing power was not high, so even the Maoist army did not use it often. However, this did not mean that Mo Xiaoyao was completely ignorant. Yi Li nodded and said, "That's right, it is gunpowder. However, I prefer to call it a bomb." Mo Xiaoyao raised his brows and asked, "How is the power?" Since Li specially showed it to him, it naturally would not be normal. Yi Li casually picked up one and said with a smile, "Let's try it somewhere else and we'll know." It was hard to say about other weapons, but Yili was still very confident in the power of the bomb. This was because the method to make these bombs was not left behind by the previous Emperor Gaozu. It was provided by Yili herself. As expected, the bomb was thrown into a spacious room in the underground palace. After a loud explosion, Mo Xiaoyao could not help but reveal a look of surprise. After leaving the place where the bomb was placed, Yili brought Mo Xiaoyao into the innermost secret room in the underground palace. The layout of the room was very simple. It was filled with all kinds of scrolls and magical weapons. Mo Xiaoyao saw that a few of them were the same as the ones he had seen when he passed by outside. Chapter 570. Yili took out a thick booklet from a hidden compartment and handed it to Mo Xiaoyao. She smiled and said, "This is the treasure left behind by the previous emperor." Mo Xiaoyao took the booklet and flipped through it. The pages were filled with drawings of various firearms, as well as annotations. However, there were many foreign characters in the annotations that Mo Xiaoyao could not understand. However, this did not stop him from understanding. This was a booklet filled with drawings of various weapons, and the ones that could be made here were all of the worst quality. This was because many of them looked much better than the toys that Mo Xiaobao loved so much that he could not bear to part with them. Looking at the booklet, Yili softly sighed and said, "If we can really make all of these things and mass-produce them, then the army that obtains them will be truly invincible." Mo Xiaoyao frowned slightly. He looked at Yili and asked, "Does Li like these things a lot?" Yili was slightly startled. After a long time, she nodded and said, "Yes, I like them a lot." How could she not like them? In the short 20 years of her previous life, she had been working with these things for 20 years. She was familiar with them and liked them as if they were her family and comrades. Mo Xiaoyao said, "Then let's have people make them all." Yili smiled and said, "Making them all? I'm afraid we won't be able to see it in our lifetime. If we really want to make all of these things, how can it be done without 100 or 200 years? The military was not the only aspect that was involved in this. Every aspect of technology had to be developed at the same time to be able to create such advanced weapons." Mo Xiaoyao frowned and said, "If that's the case, then this Emperor Gaozu of the previous dynasty really was a genius. It's a pity that he did not make these things back then. Or perhaps he wanted to make them but did not have the time." After the previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu ascended the throne and unified the world, he did not rule for too long. Based on the scale of this underground palace, it was very likely that he died before he could complete it. Yili smiled faintly, "A genius? Perhaps. Naturally, the blueprints left behind were not considered geniuses. In fact, in Yili's opinion, these blueprints could not even be considered professional. At most, they were at the level of an amateur weapon enthusiast. However, it was not easy for a transmigrator to unify the world in a chaotic world. Even the founder of the Dechu state could not be considered to have truly unified the world. After all, Xiling and Dechu state were originally one entity. Yili herself could be considered a transmigrator or a reborn person, so she naturally understood that people like them could not be said to be blessed by the heavens. Although it was an additional chance to survive, it wasn't that easy to be as domineering as in many novels, with groups of underlings and beautiful women. Her environment was already not bad, and she had experienced so many things. One could imagine how much hardship and hard work that senior had gone through to create a dynasty. Is Li very familiar with him? Mo Xiaoyao placed Mo Xiaobao on the table and turned to look at Yili as he asked. Mo Xiaobao seemed to have sensed that his parents were talking about something very important. He did not speak much and obediently sat on the table playing with the small toy in his hand. Just now, Yili had retracted the bullet too quickly, so this child did not notice that something was missing from the gun. So he was very confused as to why he could not shoot something powerful from the gun like his mother. Yili smiled faintly and fondly stroked the calligraphy on the booklet on the table. The person in the booklet had very showily used flowery characters to leave an English signature. The people of this era could only see it as a pattern. After pondering for a moment, Yi Li said, I am somewhat familiar with this previous dynasty's great ancestor. Perhaps no one in this world is more familiar with him than me. Mo Xiaoyao was silent. Yi Li smiled at him and asked, You don't suspect my relationship with him? Mo Xiaoyao said, Li is the granddaughter of the Su family. The descendants of the Su family could not have any relationship with the previous dynasty's emperor. Yi Li blinked and asked, Then you don't have anything you want to ask? Mo Xiaoyao was silent for a moment before asking, Li came from the same place as him? Yi Li was stunned. She did not think that Mo Xiaoyao would make such a guess. So close. No, this was the real answer. Mo Xiaoyao looked at her with a gentle gaze and smiled faintly. Li has never hidden anything from me, has she? She clearly came from a scholarly family and has never interacted with outsiders, yet she has such inconceivable skills. There is also Li's familiarity with the battlefield. Occasionally, she has some strange but novel ideas. There is also the writing on that treasure map. Even the previous dynasty's imperial family did not recognize it, yet Li seems to be very familiar with it. And I feel that previous dynasty's great ancestor is actually very similar to Li in some ways. Yi Li smiled helplessly and said, So I actually revealed so many flaws. Mo Xiaoyao gently stroked Yi Li's cheek and said with a smile, Li has never hidden anything. Yi Li admitted that other than the very beginning in front of Mo Xiaoyao, she had never seriously tried to hide anything. It was not only because Mo Xiaoyao was too sensitive, but deliberately trying to hide things would only backfire. More importantly, Mo Xiaoyao was the most important person in her life. Mo Xiaoyao smiled but didn't answer, looking at Yi Li who was still angry. She really was a stupid girl. How could the usually elegant and graceful Li, whose every action was filled with flirtatious charm in his eyes, be a man in her past life? Father King, Mother. Mo Xiaobao blinked his pure big eyes as he looked at his parents, curiously asking, Father King and Mother are playing kissing? Xiaobao also wants to play. Mother, kiss kiss. In order to express his expectation, Mo Xiaobao deliberately used his little chubby hand to point at his pink and tender little mouth. Yi Li turned pale with fright. Chen who told you that Mother and are playing kissing? Her son was only 5 years old, did he need to be so precocious? She remembered that they had never done anything too intimate in front of Xiaobao. Was it because she always kissed Xiaobao? Mo Xiaobao seriously thought about it and said, It's Father King. Last time I saw Father King secretly kissing Mother while she was asleep. Father King said that only people who love each other can play kissing. Xiaobao also loves Mother. Xiaobao wants a kiss. Mo Xiaoyao. Yi Li angrily glared at Mo Xiaoyao, This month you will sleep in the study. Finished speaking, she didn't wait for Mo Xiaoyao's explanation and turned to leave. Mo Xiaoyao's face darkened as he stared at Mo Xiaobao on the table. Mo Xiaobao innocently looked at his Father King with his pure big eyes. Father King, why is Mother angry? Why didn't she kiss Xiaobao? Does Mother not love Xiaobao anymore? Don't think that you can escape by pretending to be innocent. When did I secretly kiss your mother? Even if he secretly kissed her, how could it be seen by a 5-year-old kid? He, Mo Xiaoyao, who had been unhindered for a lifetime, was actually tricked by his own son. Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao was about to stretch out his evil claws, Mo Xiaobao quickly crawled up and used his butt to cry in front of his father. Woo woo. Mother doesn't love Xiaobao anymore. Xiaobao is the child that Mother doesn't love. Looking at his son who was lying on the table with his little butt sticking up and crying, Mo Xiaoyao finally didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When this kid grows up, he will definitely be a disaster. Chapter 571. In the early winter of the 18th year of Emperor Jing's reign in Dechu State, the barbarian tribes in the north of Dechu State invaded. Emperor Mo Jingqi mobilized 300,000 soldiers to expel the enemy but was defeated. Of the 300,000 elite soldiers, only 70 to 80,000 remained and fled. Within a month, the defending generals of the Chu state retreated several cities. The northern army chased them all the way to Zijing Pass in the north of the Chu state. They were less than 400 li away from the Chu capital. In the 12th month, Mo Jingqi appointed northern general Leng Huai as the general to suppress the enemy. Leng Huai's eldest son, Leng Qingyu, as the deputy general to lead 400,000 soldiers to face the enemy. However, the barbarians in the north were brave and skilled in battle. They had been fighting for many years and were very valiant. Even a veteran like Leng Huai, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, could barely hold on. It was extremely difficult to reclaim the land they had lost. The two armies in front of Zijing Pass faced each other for a long time. The people in the Chu state were also anxious and restless. Many courtiers had even suggested moving the capital to Guangling in the south. Mo Jingqi naturally would not agree to moving the capital. Now, the south was actually Mo Jingli's territory. In Jing, this younger brother of his was faintly looking down on him. If he went to the south, Mo Jingli would probably dare to directly usurp the throne. But even so, Mo Jingqi's days were not easy. Just the daily battle reports sent to the imperial court were enough to give him a headache. There were also the people who had fled to Jing because of the chaos of war. Large numbers of people flooded into Jing, but there was limited space in the capital. Naturally, it could not take in so many refugees. But if these refugees were allowed to starve, die of illness, or freeze to death, it would probably cause chaos before the powerful soldiers of the north attacked. Looking at the mountain of memorials in front of him, Mo Jingqi had a splitting headache. Only now did he have to admit in his heart that compared to Mo Xiaoyao, he was not as capable. Mo Xiaoyao was able to turn the tide in such a dire situation, but he could only rage at a mess of reports. In the depths of the imperial palace, noble consort Lu sat by the window, silently looking at the pure white snow outside. The snow-white snow fox cloak made her cold face look like an ice sculpture, chilling to the bone. Behind her, Tan Jiji was sitting on a soft couch at the side. He was holding onto a heater as he revealed a comfortable expression and sighed, "Isn't imperial concubine Nyang Nyang afraid of the cold? It's all white outside, what's there to see?" Noble consort Lu looked back and glanced at him coldly, "Why are you here?" Tan Jiji smiled and said, "Of course I'm here to help noble consort." Noble consort Lu sneered and said disdainfully, "Help me?" He was nothing more than a drowning dog that was wanted in Nanzhao. What's the use of you and Shu Manlin's meticulous plans? If Prince Ding and Su Qingchen moved their fingers, wouldn't you have no choice but to run away with your tail between your legs? Now that you don't have Shu Manlin, what other cards do you have? Tan Jiji's expression changed slightly. A trace of anger and viciousness flashed through his eyes. He quickly smiled and said, "Does noble consort Nyang Nyang think that Shu Manlin is the only card I have?" Noble consort Lu looked at him calmly and said, "What else do you have? Do you want to say that you're a descendant of the imperial family of the previous dynasty? You're all descendants of the imperial family. That young master Lin Yuan did much better than you. You've been working hard for so many years without accomplishing anything, and you still dare to say that you want to help I? Shut up." Tan Jiji was furious. His expression was ferocious. Who does Ren Qining think he is? He's just an imposter. He was the imperial family's descendant of the previous dynasty. He was Lin Yuan. Ren Qining was just an imposter who came out of nowhere. Noble consort Lu snorted and didn't say anything else, but the contempt in her eyes was obvious. Did he think that the title of the imperial family's descendant was valuable? A descendant of the imperial family that had perished nearly 200 years ago because the people had no way to make a living could never win the support of the people. That Ren Qining, who called himself Lin Yuan, probably saw this clearly and chose to start from the northern region. As long as he really took over the world and announced his identity as the imperial family's descendant, the resistance to his ascension to the throne would be much lower. Compared to a foreign race entering the Central Plains and becoming the emperor, the people and gentry would naturally be more willing to accept a descendant of the previous dynasty with noble blood. Seeing noble consort lose contempt, Tanjiji breathed heavily to hide the viciousness in his eyes. Finally, he laughed and said, "You really don't need it. Maybe I can tell noble consort Lu a very important piece of news." Of course, if noble consort Lu isn't interested, then forget it. Noble consort Lu frowned slightly and stared at Tanjiji with some displeasure. It seemed that she was considering whether she should listen to his so-called news. Tanjiji leaned on the soft couch and said with a smile, "Noble consort Lu, don't worry. This may not be bad news for you." Noble consort Lu narrowed her eyes. "It may not be bad news, but it could be bad news. Go ahead." Tanjiji raised his eyebrows and said, "Prince Li bought a magical medicine from the holy land of Nanjiang." Noble consort Lu looked at him coldly and didn't even blink. Her indifferent look seemed to be saying that it had nothing to do with her. Tanjiji laughed loudly and looked at noble consort Lu, saying, "I like noble consort Lu's personality. It's so cold and heartless that it makes people admire you. That was why Prince Ding didn't like this kind of woman. She was as beautiful as an ice sculpture, and her heart was so cold and heartless that it could make any man admire her wholeheartedly. Look at the Princess Ding married to Prince Ding. She was elegant and graceful when she was calm, but radiant when she acted. She could be kind and cruel, but she could also be gentle and strong. She had outstanding abilities and a devoted husband. She had an extraordinary status, but she wasn't arrogant at all. This kind of woman was the dream of every man." Noble consort Lu's appearance and talent were nothing in the eyes of a man who really had excellent taste. Of course, he would never tell this proud woman in front of him about this. Noble consort Lu looked at Tanjiji with a frown. For some reason, she felt that Tanjiji's words weren't all compliments. But it didn't matter. She had never taken Tanjiji seriously, so she didn't care what he thought of her. "Noble consort Lu, are you really not interested in what Prince Li bought? Or, noble consort Lu, you don't want to know who Prince Li bought it for?" Tanjiji said with a smile. Noble consort Lu thought of something and looked at Tanjiji calmly. Tanjiji knew her very well, so he knew that he had aroused her interest. Tanjiji didn't try to hide it. He said with a smile, "Yes, it's what you think. It's for the one in the imperial study. And, I guess that the medicine has been used for a month." Noble consort Lu frowned and said, "His Majesty doesn't feel unwell." Tanjiji said with a smile, "Of course he doesn't feel unwell. Not only that, his body will be very good. But, once the medicine stops or it's been used for too long, His Majesty will suffer a lot. There used to be a lot of medicine, but after Princess Anqi ascended the throne, the sacred land of Nanjiang rebelled and burned the entire sacred land of Nanjiang to the ground. Of course, the medicine is gone. Mo Xiaoyao has no more than half a year's supply." Noble consort Lu thought for a while with a frown, then asked, "What do you want?" "You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.